Okay, greetings everybody and welcome to another Wu-Sabat Outformation class UK, brought to you by All Eyes on Egypt, Midlands and the North. Thank you Hara M. Habab for the introduction, and we'll be cracking on with today's class, Freaks and the Perfect Creature, part 1. It is useful as always to have a pen and paper to make notes. We are doing a bit of reading today. I know when we read, sometimes it makes people fall asleep, so obviously have questions at the ready so you don't get drowsy, so to speak. And as I say, just help us to get a reasonable foundation and cover a few topics before we extract, as I say, some of the some of the subjects that Freak and the Perfect Creature teaches us about by way of the doctrine of Wu-Sabat. So we'll get into that in a bit more detail as we proceed through this class today. So welcome everybody. I'm just going to do a few sort of basic introductory things for us today. So I'm just going to run a short poll just to check that you can hear me okay wherever you are in the world. So the poll on the screen, can you hear my voice clearly over the Om chant in the background? If you're on a mobile device, you need to swipe left or right to get to the right screen. Just confirm, as I say, that you can hear me okay. If you're on Facebook and you're joining us on Facebook, welcome. You will not be able to see the polls that we're running internally. So if you do need to, if you do want to see those polls, then you can, in the actual comments, there is a link into the Zoom class for today for the full interactive experience. If you are having problems with your sound, then just drop a note in the chat and we'll be able to adjust that for you, assist you with how that may work, or just give us some feedback as to what the problem might be. Okay. Check one. I think is that, then it may be better if the individual just turn the volume up a little bit, set some feedback as people can't hear us correctly. Okay, right. Moving on to the next poll then. So just going to check that you can see the visuals on the screen okay. So you should be able to see the Wu-Sabat Outformation classes template. So can you see that on the screen okay? If you can answer in the affirmative or the negative. Okay, it seems everybody can see the visuals okay, so I will end that poll. Right, okay, so just a short introduction. This is something from our culture referred to as Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, the affirmation. So we're just going to start the class off with some positive prayer affirmation from our culture, just to help us align with our ancestors, Panatharu Musalafu, and so we have a positive class and experience for today. So I'm going to say in our native Sabaic language and then translate that into English for full and proper understanding. Aldoe kale namazurat wufakor ame kasam un empa paut. Anuki jawef pa ashuk empa paut. Wu kale ashuk kawun jawef neya. Anuki kasam un empa paut. Wu pa paut kawun kasam un emneya. Anuki wahu ameh pa paut. Wu pa paut kawun wahu ameh neya. Nakuk kadur naju ameh kasam un empa paut. Wu khabub ameh mushachas un. Nakuk kadur kawan kale pafef. Nakuk dayur jawef pa paut. Ameh wase, ameh tayarni, kawun lakei bakoe jawef pa paut. Anuki abed bi nafashni, pa paut kawun anuki, pa paut kadur nakuk kadur, pa paut amul nakuk amul. Okay, so let's just go back. So we said begin all prayers and thinking as a part of the all, and then we said I am in the divine love of the all expanding, and all divine love is in me. I am a part of the all expanding, and the all expanding is a part of me. I am one as the all expanding, and the all expanding is one as me. I can succeed as a part of the all expanding and fail as an individual person. I can be all that I want in the all expanding as long as my want is to stay in the all expanding. I am never by myself. The all expanding is I am. The all expanding can, I can. The all expanding does, I do. So that was a positive affirmation from our culture, and said in the Misbatia or Sabaic language, translated into English for you. Now, if you're just joining us on the Zoom platform for the first time today, then just a few introductory tips. So if you do want to adjust your audio settings on your panel on the left-hand side, if there is an issue with your sound, you may be able to adjust that there and to the right setting, just to be able to hear and what we're saying carefully today, depending on what device that you may have at home. Next to that, you're going to see a chat symbol, and if you do have any messages for the facilitators today who are going to be assisting with this seminar, please select panelists and all participants. I think the default is as panelists, but please select panelists and all participants. That enables everybody to see the messages that everybody else is posting in the chat. And so these basically should be feedback, anything that's not questions relating to the class today. So it could be feedback, positive, negative, sounds not working, whatever it is. Greetings everybody, whatever it is. So feedback in the chat. All participants on the Zoom platform can see what you're saying in that regard. If it's not a question. If it is a question, then there's two methods to ask questions. So if you want to come in verbally and ask your question to myself as a student teacher and the Ba'h B'ah for today, simply raise your hand, and at the appropriate time, one of the facilitators will come to you and say your name or your call handle, however you've registered today, and then you'll be asked to unmute your microphone, and that will enable you clearly to speak and ask your question, interact with us verbally with the session today. If you've dialed in, then the controls are slightly different, so you need to press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute your phone and then mute it back again. So once we give you the power to unmute yourself, you will have the ability then to unmute yourself at will. And so we ask you, just once you've asked your question, to mute yourself back so not to disturb the rest of the session for today. Now, if you're not comfortable or don't feel to come across it verbally to ask your question, then you can do so in written format. So simply select the next option, which is Q&A, and ask your question in that regard. And then what will happen is periodically I will come back to the facilitator today, Manthu Gabab, and ask if there's any questions, and then he'll ask that question on your behalf. If there's for some reason the question is not clear, or the answer's not clear, or I've not answered it correctly, then by all means give that feedback so that we can add additional clarification or ask further questions to enable you to get the answers you need for today. So those are that's the setup on Zoom. We're not directly monitoring the Facebook live, so if you do have questions and you want them answered now, then I would suggest that you join by way of the link into the Zoom platform. It takes about 30 seconds to register. If not, then as I say, if you put them in the chat, then they'll be answered after the class is finished. We're not monitoring that in the live context at this time. Periodically we have poll questions. We probably have them on the next session, not this one, just as a time for today and certain things we want to get through. But definitely I would pay attention, because the next class, the poll questions will be related to this class, and that's just to help knowledge retention. This is a class. So basically it's interactive. The more you engage, I suppose, the more you're going to learn from it. And so, certain concepts and things, it also helps to see, okay, well, am I talking gibberish or nonsense? Can you understand what's being conveyed, etc.? And if not, as I say, you being able to apply that or answer the questions where they're given will give us some indicator that you've retained or understand, what has been conveyed over these few hours of the session today. Okay, I can see a hand raised. Is there a question?
One moment, I'm just getting to that. It's by Anne is wanting to ask a question. I'll allow her to talk. Anne, I'm letting you in now. You'll have to unmute yourself. You're now unmuted. I think it was by default.
Okay, no problem. All right, keep it moving if you do have a question, and then by all means ask when you're ready. So today's session, and say who we are, United Sabians Worldwide. The founder of our organization is a man by the name of Dr. Malachi Z York Okran, who we refer to as the master teacher. I think it's demonstrated certainly since 1963. All the way up until today, certainly written over 1,000 books published of various different sizes, and is considered to be a master at teaching. That's why I refer to him as the master teacher, an affectionate term, I suppose, by those who know him to be that. And obviously as a student teacher studying under the master teacher, that's why we refer to ourselves as students studying under the master. Maybe like, I don't know, somebody in a martial arts class may refer to the person teaching as sensei, this type of terminology. Now you might hear me refer to sometimes speaking as we, even though I'm a singular person speaking on the mic, and that is referencing the fact that obviously we're part of a group or an order, the Madrasu Tashrak, Student Teachers Association, and so that's why you might hear me say we, as in reference to the student teachers, say under or studying under the master teacher, as part of, say, conveying what we're talking to you about today. Now it's important, and this sets of classes re-emphasizes that again of understanding, I suppose, what a teacher or any sort of source of information that you choose to read or take in or absorb, who is behind it and what are their influences, what is their sort of cultural system. You understand? I'm just struggling slightly not to use the word belief, but in the Western Hemisphere, that's what it would represent. So what are their beliefs? What are their principles? What's their cultural background? What language they speak? So on and so forth. So these things can be important because they have an influence in how what that person is then speaking about, how it's going to be conveyed. You understand? And certain things, particularly in the English language, have not only a meaning in English, but it has a definition to that word. And also, even then, the word can be used in a way that's got nothing to do with the language. It's been informed by the person's cultural, as I say, principles or beliefs, and as I say, what they themselves believe in. So if you don't understand that and they don't make it clear in when they're writing or speaking, then what happens is you can make assumptions and you could be completely wrong. So it's important that you have some foundation, as I say, of who the individual is and where they're coming from, at least from a knowledge point of view, in terms of us, as I say, teaching today. So Dr. Malachi Z, Dr.York Okran, born in Takoradi, Ghana in 1945, coming up to his birthday next month, June 26, born on a Tuesday. As I say, and his part, as I said, was born in Ghana of the Akan tribes, the Iwe tribe specifically. Now, his mother, Mary Abba Akran-York, also known as Fatima, I say very important individual, born March 10th. Unfortunately for us to miss her physically, but fortunately in terms of her journey, ascension journey, in terms of transitioning to the other side on August 4th, 2012, and obviously becomes one of our Salafu, which translates as ancestors, and is assisting us obviously here in the physical, as well as clearly participate in her own ascension journey as an individual soul, part of obviously the collective, as our collective race in the context of Papa or all. Now, you see her here in the clan mother attire, her royal attire, and so we were always a matriarchal society as a people, monotheistic religion, which has been informed by extraterrestrials of the Sumerian doctrine, which we'll get into a little bit later today, was patriarchal. That's where the patriarchal influence came in, certainly in the last 6,000 or so years, also maybe going back even 24,000 years, seeing some of that influence coming in when the new calendar came in. Obviously our calendar was matriarchal, but we started to see, at least within that last 24,000 year cycle, where patriarchy started to come in and change, and the role of the sacred feminine or female was, say, put to the background. Now, obviously, as you start to step into a little bit around time today, nature is seeking to restore that back, and certainly Mary Abba Akran-York represents having birth. All leaders obviously clearly have been birthed by a female. So, excuse me. Yeah, and the source of our fuel, so to speak, comes from the mammary gland, you understand? Mary, so the mother of the god, so to speak. So that which in nature feeds the child has to be there before the child, you understand? So as we said before, if you've got a mobile phone, well, you need to think about how it's going to be powered before, you understand, the mobile phone is actually created. You think about the power, how it's going to be powered, otherwise it doesn't work. So in nature's system, the power source came before the thing that the power source feeds upon. You understand? So you have existence before creation. Understood? And so we were always a matriarchal society, feminine rule first, understood, which gave birth to the man, as opposed to the opinions that we've seen from monotheism, where talking about women coming from the rib or being subservient to a man. This is Understand that is religious information from monotheism still informing, let's say, our society today. Even though, let's say, you can see the rise of female empowerment back to date through nature. But it's important, I think, to understand what nature has to say about that, what the culture of Wu-Sabat has to say about that, as opposed to the interpretations that we're seeing potentially on social media in this society. They're not the same. They're not the same thing, if that would, in that regard. And so, to some degree, we're seeing those changes or the transformation or shift in power in nature. We're seeing female empowerment coming back again, but it's being interpreted through wrong eyes, one might say. And as I say, we're seeing the Western version of what that looks like. We need to get back to what's our version of what that's supposed to look like for the betterment, obviously, of race, environment, and obviously the planet as a whole. Now, so Mary Abigail York, mother of Dr. Malachi Z York, is a very important sacred feminine in these last 6,000 years. His father, Al-Hadi Abdul Rahman Al-Mahdi, born 1922, unfortunately was assassinated in 1970, and so it provides a very important aspect of the lineage linking back to Sudanese bloodline in that regard. He is the grandson of Mustafa Muhammad Al-Mahdi of the Sudan, who was linked to the Dongolawe tribe. In fact, is ancient Egyptian in origin, pre-dynastic link to them. But obviously, when he was born into the Islamic degree and brought what's considered to be the truth, I suppose, of that particular era or time. A master spiritualist, military strategist, etc. In his times, to say, that helped in the I suppose the tradition of previous or pharaohs that had previously came prior to him, where he drove, as I say, foreign invaders out of the lands of Africa back across the burning sands into Europe. So Aha, which is the proper way to say Pharaoh. Yeah, Temple of the Sun and Moon is what it means. And to say, in that tradition, as I say, he drove them out. But was only on the planet for around 40 years before he transitioned. A very highly, as I say, esoteric, etheric individual and powerful in that regard. So you have to understand that the Africans at that time were fighting against European soldiers who were, I suppose, technologically considered advanced in terms of they had machine guns, cannons, and other type of artillery, where the Ansars, who they were fighting at that time, only had spears and obviously their fighting skill against such machinery. As I say, as we see in this day and time with some of the environmental challenges that we're facing right now, none of that can fight against the power and the forces of nature, which is obviously clearly why environmental factors, sustainability, and these type of discussions are taking place across the world today and being prioritized because of the serious impacts that it can have or will have and is having on us as human beings today and other life forms. So this is Isa al-Hadi al-Mahdi, or the master teacher at age 25 years old. And as I say, in the science of Wu-Sabat, which is the science of the Nagarnadu or Negroids, or black people in this day and time, as I say, we always in our culture, there's a renewal of our story, and it's always informed by the feminine forces of nature to renew our story. And that comes in the form, like with other races, similar to their system, they will have teachers sent to them by their ancestors in order to inform us or reinform us, one might say, or reform us back to the natural path that we are supposed to be observing as life forms here on the planet Earth. So our ascension pathway and what we are supposed to be doing to develop and perfect ourselves to achieve perfection in this realm is always informed by teachers from our own ancestry who will come and inform what that path should be, or reform in the case of this individual, because we had stepped so far away from what we originally were supposed to be. And certainly in the last 6,000 years, that's been more acute. Now, the methodology of doing that in ancient Egypt was known as an Amun-Nabab Ra'ye Achakhta. The Egyptians or ancient Egyptians referred to that individual as Tahuti, and in many different cultures, many different names understood. And that is a vehicle or vessel, like in, say, Islam, it's Ila Mutajasid. In Hinduism, they say avatar. So it's a vehicle or a vessel that's been designed and then cultivated throughout that individual's life to be able to in-house etheric beings or ancestors to speak through that individual to convey the information necessary that we need, as say, for that reformation this day and time. Now, obviously, whether one accepts that to be fact or true, whatever the case would be, you can only judge it by the works that you're seeing. And so you're seeing that evidenced in the output in terms of the books, the teachings, say, over a number of years, which is showing the hand, one may say, of the Parnataru, our etheric ancestors, a hand in shaping this individual, as other races around the world have their own teachers, etc., which also may be world famous in that regard, that have helped to inform them. So from 1970 down to the year 2000 was considered the first half an hour, and say, or in a state of ignorance into understanding, and the being that in-house was a person or individual by the name of El Khadir, or he was known at least, the Green One. So between 1963 and 1970, the books that were being released, or what was being taught at that time, known as Wu-Sabat, obviously updated name now, but known as Wu-Sabat, it was too heavy for the people at that time, you understand? And even the language today, if you go back and read books like the 9 Ball Bible interpretations, these types of books, the language being used is more understandable now because of the breadth of work that has been, or work that's been released to help people gain that understanding and raise their intellect up to a level where, okay, we can understand certain concepts, etc., that were being produced. So in order to be effective, they decided at that particular point, well, I came giving you what you want, so you would learn to want what I really came to give. And effectively, at that time, we wanted religious teachings. We wanted to believe in something, some kind of higher force, spook God, that type of thing. And so the Bible certainly was more prominent, as were books like the Torah, what the Jews follow, first 5 books of the Bible, and then the Quran also. So those religious degrees is where, I suppose, our belief system from what we'd grown up with, or what we knew, at least out of the multiple choices that they'd given us in this society, that seemed to be where we'd imprinted our soul and our mind upon at that time. So in order to get us to the truth, as I say, the approach that was used was to use those religious degrees to help us to grow before we would be ready then to accept our own stuff. So the combination that was used there was obviously Isa al-Hadi al-Mahdi and El Khadir, who taught in that combination up to the year 2006. 1996, 1996, with the release of a book called The Holy Tablets, it was still predicted by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, also known as the Book of the Lamb, Book of Lamb, because each of the chapters and tablets, in fact, each of the tablets within the book start low in Sun, and symbolic of the Arabic letter Lam in Sun, equivalent, I suppose, to the English L. And when Imam Isa used to appear, he had like the shepherd's crook overstood, which he used to hold. Very many pictures depicted him showing this, in the Sun, particularly known also as the lamb. But if you turn that crook upside down, let's say it looks like a L. You understand? This was the symbolism of the pen of this individual that would certainly change the course of many of the pathway of the Nagaru, as then lost but now found, or 13th tribe, here certainly in the Western Hemisphere, but obviously world over as well. Because this monotheistic teachings, as I say, has permeated the world and placed, as I say, a barrier between who we are versus the what we have become in this society. So bringing in the secondary or the next level of teaching, so to get back to what he originally came to teach, that needed an updated or new combination. And this was by way of, let's say, Dr. Malachi Z, Dr.York, Okran, and then the Ifrit being housing him was known as Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, or is known as Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, and that's giving that next level of teaching to get, which they refer to as the hereafter doctrine, because hereafter the devil's rule ended when the nines aligned, the 9th of September 1999, coming into the year 2000 was the end of their time, or end of their era of the Caucasian, or the Mukasu, as they're being referred to in the Sabat language. This was the end of their era as programmed within their genealogy by their ancestors, or their overlords, giving them 6,000-year dominion, according to their book, which you can read about, obviously, in Genesis, and in chapter 1, and also in chapter 6, you see time limits placed in there in terms of their dominion. So 6,000-year ruleship was to end at that point, and obviously it was a changing of a cycle, or end of an era. Understand? And so, or eon, as they would refer to it as end of an era, or eon in their thing. Era means something slightly different for us, but this was now new cycle information to come in. So hereafter the devil's rule ended, and so now was the incoming of our information in form of actual facts, Partarak, and obviously Master Secrets as the main type of, as I say, books being released to teach you about who you are, as opposed to what we became. In the sense, seemingly that the spell of religion had been broken, so now we were ready now to receive what he really came to give. So I'm not going to dwell too much on these issues. So we've covered, I think, these in previous classes. What I do want to do is get into some elements which are going to feature just to set the foundation for what we need to cover today, so we don't run out of time. So if you do want more information about who we are, then check out some previous classes, and we'll put up our YouTube channel. So you can find out more detail on that. There's a new website coming as well, which will help people, let's say, to engage a bit more with, I suppose, our story, the cultural side, so on and so forth. Now, so it comes in the line of a number of great teachers, and the approach that was used to break the spell that was upon blacks specifically, and so we get into that in this class today to get to really understand it even a little bit better, what has taken place to remove that ignorance. Because one of the issues or challenges that the spell has cast upon us is ignorance, spiritual ignorance, not knowing how things really work. You understand the rules of nature, how the environment works, etc. So we do a lot of things out of ignorance, and it makes life arguably harder for us at our ascension pathway. Harder because, as I say, almost like a veil of ignorance is sat upon us in this society, which doesn't really have any culture. Western society here in the UK, many people listen to this cast from the States, so on and so forth. In the Western culture, we don't have any culture. And so when they're trying to manage change or apply certain solutions, whether it's transgender issues or it's this kind of rising thing now between men and women, you see constantly on social media battling who should be doing what. You should be doing this, a person should be doing that, shoulda. The reality is, well, where's the cultural context? Because a lot of what we do today, our belief systems, you understand, particularly men and women, has been informed by, as I say, what we picked up and read or believed from the monotheistic religions, whether we were under the Judaic school, you understand, whether a lot were under the biblical school, and whether many now, the new thing, we'll see, is Islam, you understand, which is deemed to be maybe a bit more hardcore, understood, than some of those others, given that Christianity was the primary religion that was imposed upon our people. Now maybe the alternative has seemed to be a bit more hardcore, but it's all part of the same spider's web. It's all part of the same spider's web of the spell. Yeah, because those are the options that, he, as in the Caucasian or the Mukasu, that's what they gave us. And we picked out of the religions that he had placed on the table. Yeah, and one of the things why it's important, when you look at some of the books that the master teacher has written, it has in the past, and it had a significant kind of introduction of, this is where I've walked, and these are the schools that I've sort of been through, to inform you where the thinking was, the thoughts or the mindset, I suppose, behind those books, to show I've walked a certain path in that regard. But that pathway wasn't designed to convince you by virtue of the fact that, of the person's pedigree. You understand? So some people will say, okay, well, I'm a scientist, so because I'm a scientist and I've gone to such and such school and studied this type of degree, that means I'm qualified to speak on X. Understood? You understand? So by way of their pedigree, they're informing you about something, and then you should accept that because of who I am, what school I went to, what institution I'm a part of, so on and so forth. Understood? Whereas Wu-Sabat doesn't teach that. So if the master is saying to you, don't believe me, check it out, that means that even though I am who I am, you still got to check out what I'm saying, because for your own self, you have to get to a point of knowing as opposed to belief. You understand? Belief is acceptance of things that you don't know to be true. Understood? So you still got to put the work in. And this society wants you to some degree accept my pedigree, accept what I'm saying because of my pedigree. Now that may be, in certain instances, the person's knowledge, expression, what they're doing, their actions, so on and so forth, matches the qualification. But just because something has been around for a long time and been accepted for a long time does not make it factual. So a new mindset was needed to get us back to who we're supposed to be in this day and time, because, as I say, our ancestors did not build pyramids, we say it all the time, on faith and belief. Understood? So the spell is significant, and even though people may think that they are endarkened or enlightened, depending on how you see knowledge in that regard, and certainly because people think, oh, well, I've stepped away from Christianity, or I've stepped away from this or whatever, and I'm now doing something that maybe feels a bit more Afrocentric. A lot of those concepts that they've taken, the religious concept, they've taken them back into maybe some type of Afrocentric thinking, and they're still incorrect. So we have to understand that a cleansing is required. You understand? Not to do a physical and a spiritual baptism also of knowledge, thinking, do you understand, to inform or cleanse what we know to be understanding, to take us into an overstanding, let's say for a select few, understanding. These things, there are cleansing needs to take place. And so, as I say, this is why it was necessary to move us through a certain schools. Yeah, the Master Teacher's approach was to immerse those who were studying unto him in that knowledge. So you live it, understood, to really get that understanding of it. Then I can teach you the next level of where really things really came from. And all roads lead to ancient Africa, or ancient Egypt specifically, where we find ourselves certainly at one of our highest heights of expression, fulfilling our potential, and our way of life, as I say, was perfected in that regard. And so in this day and time, that perfect way of life for us, being given and reimagined for us back in this day and time, is referred to as Wu-Sabat, the science of the Nagaru. And it enables us to unify mentally, and in order to have physical unity, as I say, the mind must be addressed first. Yeah, the mind, if the mind is not right, as I say, the actions that follow then thereafter will be wrong. And so if you want right thinking informs right actions. So the mind has to be addressed in the first instance. So we understand that the deities that sitting behind the Bible, and particularly the Bible, and obviously the Torah, as I say, the first 5 books, and the Quran is nothing but a copy of, as I say, the books that came before it. Before the Master Teacher was incarcerated, he was working on a book called the Noble Quran, which, interesting enough, showed how every verse in the Quran is a copy of one that came from the books that came before it, and how it's been copied and just changed names, places, so on and so forth, to inform that. Now, it's important, as I say, when you're looking at these things. Now, if none of us had ever read the Bible or the Quran, etc., Wu-Sabat would not be taking any time to even address these types of issues. So it's only by way of the conditions that we found ourselves in why we have to take time in a lot of instances to do that. But if a person just coming across this stuff and never read a Bible or Quran, then it's not a necessity, you understand, for them to read those particular books. We just use them for the approach of comparative studies, so that you can see where certain things have come from. And actually that's more powerful if I can show you our stuff in their stuff, understood, and how the game, as I say, as it continues to be played even in this day and time, even with the amount of knowledge, discoveries, technology that we have today, games are still being played to maintain this ignorance, not only just on blacks, but clearly across the world, to keep us suppressed, as I say, under this old school type of religious thinking. So these extraterrestrials of the Bible, you see here various names that have changed over time. I'm going to be exploring that in much more detail today. They're also known as the old ones or the first ones. Yeah, these Anunnaki, or group of extraterrestrials. An interesting thing here, you see the 2 brothers, as I say, Enlil, meaning ruler of the skies, Nunamir. So this is the title, the job title, so to speak, or the position. This was the individual's name, or as they were known, and then this is showing who they are in the Bible, because obviously the books have been copied from the Sumerian tablets, like the Enuma-Elish, Gilgamesh epics, so on and so forth. This conflict between these 2 brothers. The older brother here, Enki, ruler of the earth. You see his name, or this is the position, ruler of earth, and then this is his name, and then Yahweh is how he was known in the Bible. And then who, I suppose, reported to them, if you want to, is the best way to say it. And you get that biblically expressed as seraphim and cherubim. But in the Sumerian tablets, these were known as the Ikiki, in a sense, those who observed, it was from the space station from above, and then you got the Dingir, the righteous ones of the rocket ship. Now, interesting enough, in natural ether energy, the Master in verse 244 says, both sons of the Most High God Anu as one God, so they use us, we as one, or me, for both of their orders. So even though at certain points the Anunnaki and the Natharu work together, certainly on this side of the family, because Inky mixed in with the Sands people in South Africa, understood, and this is why we have certain wonder points why we have Anunnaki genes, or both sides in us, and which is why they sent a teacher who was equipped with both natures to deal with us in that regard. But as I say, this is showing you here that each has their own agendas, you understand? So even when walking back through these schools, we're going back to the source, obviously, as ontologists, because people have their own agendas, and all of that may not be for our best interest in terms of our ascension pathway and where we need to be aligning ourselves to. Even though, as I say, at certain points, as we are learning certain truths, or certain truths are being uncovered, it is necessary to study certain doctrines, even though they may not be our own, because some of the way it was informed is helping us, as I say, to understand or get some context of why certain things were done, even to the point, even if you look at us today, why we look like why we look, how we've inherited certain languages, what we've morphed into today. As we walk back and see, it's sometimes important for us to understand that journey, to see what was done to us, and then again to be able to move forward comfortably, because of clearly of the amount of trauma one may argue that is in our genetics and genes, certainly in the last 6,000 or so years. Understood? So it's important, I suppose, to understand who we are, but then who's everybody else at the same time as well. And so games continue to be played. I mean, look here, for example, we see Inanna, Ishtar, and Tamuzi, she also known as Ashtoreth. In the Islamic degree, she's known as Al-Uzza, understood, and was obviously the head of the 360 idols before Islam was introduced into that region, referred to as Mecca today, but rightly called Becca. And so before Islam was, because Muhammad wasn't born into the religion of Islam, and we'll get into that too much today, but he wasn't born into that religion, he got converted into it, understood? So that's an interesting one. The question is, well, what was he doing before then? And the idols that they worship, the 360 idols, Al-Uzza was the head of those 360 idols, and her name is Inanna in the Sumerian doctrine. Now, interesting enough, in Genesis chapter 15 verse 1 and chapter 7 verses 1 through 4, we see the use of the term I am, or I, understand? I am, I think, 15 verse 1, and then I throughout 7 verse 1. And what they don't inform, and what the Master, even in the hereafter doctrine and into the thereafter doctrine, continues to show, is that this is who we are in terms of, or who I am, showing you that there's things that you think you know and you don't really know. So the I being used there in actually is a word, Hebrew word named Anarchy. Yeah, anarchy. Yeah, spelled for proper understanding. Let's try and put that on the page. Yeah, anarchy. Different spellings. Yeah, different spellings. But anarchy, and then its equivalent is ani. So this is feminine in the language. Yeah, and this is the equivalent I in as masculine. And so even in their stories that they've given, so the person who spoke to Noah, for example, in their story, not proven to have existed, was a female, not a male. So the Lord God that spoke to Noah was a female. And same in 15 verse 1, speaking to Abraham. It was a female. Yeah, the word anarchy is or Anochi, or some might say Anochi, Anarchy. It sounds like the Sabatic word Anuki, but it was a female word, or feminine in origin, showing that a female was speaking in that regard. And this is why, as I say, you get a lot of issues, because if I go to a show, let's just jump on Google for a second. Let's just jump on Google for a second, David. What we're going to see is, if we went into those verses, because really, when you use a Strong's Concordance, for example, it should enable you to be able to check out any word in the Bible and see its Hebrew meaning. But they play a lot of games, understood? And so, just to sort of show you again, if we just get into Google for a sec. Okay, right, let's see. Right, so if I went into Blue Letter Bible, let's just do that for a second. Yeah. And if we went into let's go to Genesis chapter 15. Let's start with 7 verse 1, it's a bit easier. When I go to 7 verse 1 and I'm looking at so let's go to 7 verse 1. We see the word I there, correct? So usually when we click on our concordance, we can see Strong's numbers there. And interestingly enough, we see Strong's numbers there. And interestingly enough, when I try to click to find out what the I is, I can't get to the I word. I can get to some other here. You see the word ra'ah there, which is not the word I in the phrase. It's dealing with the word seen here. Understand? So they've phrased it so I can't see, well, what's the meaning of the word I in that particular context, in that verse. Now, when we go to, let's go here, let's go 7:4. Go to verse 4. We see again the eyes kind of myriaded in a phrase. I can't see what it's saying individually. Understood? And again, they're phrased off these eyes. Now, it might be a bit clearer if I go to Genesis 15, verse 1 to show you what I'm talking about. Because the term I am is there. So I am thy shield, etc., etc. Yeah, you can see that. So after these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abraham in a vision, saying, "Fear not, Abraham, I am thy shield and thy exceeding reward." Yeah. So when I try and look up I am to find out, okay, what's going on here? Who's speaking? You see, we can't even see what the Hebrew word is. There, it's been eliminated from there. Understood? Now, the interesting thing about it is that when we're looking there, there is a Strong's word for I am, and saying it's Strong's number 595. That's what it happens to be. Strong's number 595. And if you did a search, you'll find that it's in the software here in terms of 595, but it's been eliminated from view because they don't want you to see, as I say, the fact that this I am in this context is a female speaking. It's not a male speaking. So you would then think, well, hold on a minute, there are male and female gods. Understood? But there's more than one god, that's the first thing. But then there's male and female gods even within that, which in actuality, if you're reading their Bible correctly, and you go to Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2. Chapter 2, and we go to verse 4. You see that these are the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. So again, if you've got generations within the heavens, generations denotes male and female. Generations denotes physical beings, correct? Because you're talking about genes. You're not talking about spooks and spirits. You understand? Because genes are physical things. Denotes people having sex and then having children and babies. Hence why in Genesis chapter 6 in their story, clearly those angels that came down, or sons of gods who came down, were able to have sex with women on earth, and they produced children. Now, whether the children were crazy, but they produced children nonetheless, which you also find in the book of First Enoch, as well in the 7th chapter. Same thing. So the reality is that they will continue to play games, play tricks to hide the fact of the true origin. And it's the master teacher's works all of these years that have been showing and uncovering this. Now, in the context of our lives and what does it mean? Well, does it matter? Not really, because at the end of the day, there wasn't a person called Noah that was proven to ever existed and walk the planet Earth. Understood? In that regard, the same as Jesus, Moses, and things. So before you start arguing about Jesus' color of his skin, for example, you first have to prove whether he existed or not. You understand? Otherwise, it's a bit of a redundant argument. So it's only relevant to us today is to understand the game that's been played, to defeat the spiritual ignorance that has been played upon us psychologically on our minds, which is still even many of us today, I include myself in that, as much as you may have studied, as much as you may know, that spell is still there impacting a person, even if it's on a subconscious level. And so Wu-Sabat, this information was designed obviously to address that. Now, so one of the important things is about Wu-Sabat as the spiritual science of the Nagaru, understood, and our way of life, tying into 2 star constellations. Importantly, the Sirius star constellation, as they call it in their language, Sabat, and then Saha as the Orion star constellation, as they call it, or refer to it as. So our way of life is coming from the stars, outformation coming to us in the form of information. Those outformational ancestors that we're speaking about are suns. When we envisage the Panatharu, where they get the English word nature from, we should think suns. Understood? And there are different types. Obviously, in the Milky Way galaxy alone, there are over 100 million stars. So one depiction to us when we're talking about is suns. We are the terrestrial incarnation of the sun. If you think about it, we've descended down from that gaseous state. And so from a physical perspective, at least, that's why we're referred to as descendants, because we have descended down from that gaseous state, obviously, to become here into the physical. But our origin is from energy, and as certainly as animus, from a soul form first. Understood? So Wu-Sabat, each different races has their own spiritual science and way of life, and this one called Wu-Sabat, at least in this day and time, is ours. You understand? With our language, and as people we are known as Musbatu, understood, or Sabians in this day and time. Now let me move forward, covering all of this today. So this Amun Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, you understand, the renewal of our story, as we spoke on previously, is the renewal of our story, and the purpose of this individual coming to disclose the hidden past, in a certain the changing present and the ruling future. So we're going back into the past, as I say, to understand, into an overstanding of the heights of where we got to as a people. So not only to understand just our origins, but how was our society, when was it working almost in its most optimum or kind of perfect state, to inform how the renewal needs to take place in this day and time. Because, as I say, an interception happened in our genes, certainly more acutely 400 years ago, which has altered who we were supposed to be, you understand, in terms of made us unaligned, out of tune, not only with nature but our own ancestral forces. And a new hybrid was created called the Negro, you understand, from the Latin word negra, you understand, and it can be associated with a mental death that's taken place within our people. And so we need to be resurrected, so to speak, as part of the second resurrection. That second resurrection is a mental resurrection. There are many different types of death, and it's a mental resurrection that's taking place. Okay. All right, let me move forward to get too caught up in this.
Sorry, Nabab, we have a question.
Go ahead.
Right, I'm going to ask the attendee to put him forward to ask the question, because he's got his hand up. Right. Owen, I've now unmuted you. If you want to unmute yourself on your side, you can ask your question.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Loud and clear. Go ahead.
Okay. The Journey Home group, headed by AJ Vernon, he's teaching the same thing, like as in the same doctrine, with the same images and stuff like that. So for clarity, because I'm getting confused now as to, okay, I don't know whether to go left or right in who to follow as a doctrine. So they're teaching the same things as Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, but they're calling the Most High Ane. So I just want clarity as to who are they actually calling on? You know what I mean? Because we're dealing with the Natharu, but they're dealing with Ane kind of thing. So I'm kind of like, like what? Who is Ane?
Well, let's think about this logically. Yes, you're coming to me to ask a question to explain who are they and what they're doing.
Trust me, I've tried to ask them, but
okay, right. So I'm not. It's not criticism. Let me make it clear.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So our methodology or approach, before we implement the power, because in a book referred to, or an actual fact book referred to as Emotional Energy, it says the Sabian it says Nawapian or Sabian is analogous to the way air is the carrier of sound. And what that's basically saying is that analogous, meaning we can be compared to the way air is the carrier of sound. Obviously, air is the medium that allows sound to travel, correct? So before we carry something, and this even Sabians do this right now. So before we carry something away from the source, understood, we have to make sure it's factual first. If they cannot answer your questions, then you have to think, well, is that, the right thing for me? There's many people who have been influenced by the master teacher, and it's not saying that those doctrines or whatever don't have some good or whatever for whoever's reading it. But whilst the source of that information is still alive, then you want to go to the best information first that source is dealing with. Now, that source is put out in many different books, can be interpreted in many different ways. And when you're that source person as well, you have many anti-warners. Understood? And the anti-warner, so Honorable Elijah Muhammad, for example, his anti-warner was Malcolm X. Understood? So you generate these anti-warners. Now, us as individuals, when we're looking at this, must apply those principles to be able to test whether what the individual is saying is correct or true. Anybody can write books. We're not here to police who can write books, who can quote this, who can cut that. That's not our job. But you as an individual have to be able to discern what is right from wrong for you, or what is good or bad information for you from your perspective. It's interesting that we landed on this page because these are your tools. Yeah? These 6 knowledge questions. Yeah? What, where, when, why, how, and who. It used to be who, what, where, why, when, and how. Understood? The 2 W's. Understood? Yeah? The who you are, and then One represented who you are according to natural nature. The other represented who you have become by way of, in this society, certainly a lot of bad decisions because we only had access to a certain type of information. Now, in the hereafter, those 6 knowledge questions, 3 other steps were added: proof, confirmation, and reveal. Understood? So this is the 9 steps that one is supposed to be taking. Understood? Yeah? Because I've incarnated, so you only know 9 steps. So you're always seeking. You might not always get them at one time. You understand? But these are the tests. So before I carry something, and I'm saying I, as in you, me, other people, when somebody tells you something, before you carry it, you're going to want to run them through these tests. If somebody says to me, for example, hey, Nabab, you're a liar. I heard somebody says to you in a room, say, Nabab's a liar. And then you come to me and you say to me, Nabab, such and such said you're a liar. I'm going to say to you, I'm not a liar. What then happens? It's only based, well, you could believe that person or you can believe me. You understand? Now, before you carried the rumor or whatever was said, okay, well, show me proof. Show me proof. You said he's a liar. Show me proof. Let me see the evidence. Let me understand this first before I go and ask him. Because if I do that first, I don't even need to go and ask him because I'm not dealing with rumor, belief, so on and so forth. If we're really truly going to apply that test within a context of our society, do you understand? So the master's still alive. He's not dead. So, and he's still putting out books and new information. So the question is, you have to ask them is, who is this Annie Ray? Who is the source of your teaching, so on and so forth. And we know some of the history around how that organization was birthed. But it's up to them, as I say, to make that clear to the world of who their sources are and where that information has come from, and to prove what they're saying. Not off the back of, as we talked about earlier in the class, off of pedigree. You understand? Not off of pedigree. So a person can say, okay, I was this, or I followed da-da-da-da-da person. That's not to say, so I'm not knocking them, but say, I was this person, or I was that person, or I was around this person for so on and so forth and so long, or whatever. Well, you know what I mean? That's pedigree. How does your information stand up on its own, to its own tests, so on and so forth, you understand? And there are a lot of clever people out there who can, through your knowledge, be able to manipulate individuals. But as I say, you have these tests, and if they pass what you consider to be these 9 quests, then you can align with that information. Understand? Does it mean that you should dedicate your whole life to that particular organization? Well, you need to understand what their destination is, understand, and what their pathway is, and does it align to the one that, as I say, Parnatharu has laid out for you? And it's a continual journey; it doesn't just stop. With a few questions, understood. But the question to them is also, you were this at one point. Why are you not following that particular individual who kind of gave birth to you, in a sense? You understand? So it's on them to prove it, as opposed to myself looking at what they're doing and then saying, well, this is right, wrong, so on and so forth. Anything connected with the monotheistic religions is going to make you as an individual subservient to another race. That is the first and foremost of anything. So we're talking about Bible and Quran and different things today because we're talking about a specific class that we're doing today. But ultimately, when we do not have to speak about it, then, you understand, at all, then you know that we've certainly reached a significant level of development where we don't even have to mention those terms again. You understand, in that regard? Yeah. So if they're not answering your questions, I think it makes the path that you've got to follow fairly obvious.
They're a bit funny. They're a funny group. I mean, it's quite clear to me that the doctrine which they're teaching is Barnabas' doctrine. Like everything, the breakdowns, everything. You know what I mean? But they're like I went on one of their Zoom classes, and they're funny people. They will kick you out if you ask, what to them might be a silly question kind of thing. Like,
yeah, I mean, what I'm saying, not to cut you, but we're not here to talk about them today.
I know.
Yeah, so, but as I say, you got to test them. You understand? Yeah, you got to test them and how they respond. I mean, that's their right. If they want to run a class that way, that's their right. But your right is, well, I'm here for my soul. Understood?
Yeah.
And so if they can't answer what I need answered, then you understand. You have to take your decisions accordingly. If that makes sense. Yeah.
No, I understand, brother. I understand.
No problem.
Yeah, continue anyway.
Appreciate the question. Yeah, keep
no
on
problem.
going.
No problem.
Okay. All right. So, interesting alignment there. So these are the keys here, and I think what may be, even as Sabians, you understand, you can never rest. Never rest. Do not think that you know it all, or I'm there now, or you understand. You can never rest. You understand, because always new things come. You can never obtain or know all knowledge there is to know. So the humility is to remember, as I say, that you got to keep studying. You got to keep mastering. You understand? For some people, it's their first lifetime. For some people, multiple lifetimes. And you still got to work with these areas, you understand? And just because the master teacher says, don't believe me, check it out, it doesn't just apply to him. It applies to all things that we're doing, as I say, because something or certain things have pedigree, we then believe it's solid, or you understand, trust. I don't think about going to a supermarket, you understand, and picking up a chicken. You think, okay, well, because it says chicken on the label, I'm in a supermarket, etc. We believe, we don't know. The reality is we don't know until we probably put it in our mouth and taste it to see whether it really is chicken or an approximation of chicken. But imagine we lived in a society where we never ate real chicken before. I've never even seen real chicken before. Somebody from outside that would have to show you what that taste was. You understand? For you to even be able to compare. So you're caught up in a difficult situation. No one said it was an easy situation, but a difficult situation. Why I say that is because we've not been exposed really to we've only been exposed to the real secrets of our culture from until the master teacher really came along, by way of, I suppose, the Mukasu standards of doing things. Understood? And the importance that we say, until we really start to grasp and master this language that's been gifted to us, we will still retain in that mindset. You understand? So we need to apply some time, etc., and study to that as well. Now, let's keep it moving. So I'm going to jump to where we're going to be today, otherwise we're going to run out of time. There is one point that we need to make for today. We're talking about different subjects, usual stuff. I mean, no one wins a race in racism. So when we're talking about race and different things, we're speaking about it more from a scientific perspective, not dealing with race hate. As I say, it's not about racism, it's about race unity. But as I say, true equality comes with truth, liberty, and justice as well. So we need to start with, from a truthful perspective, each understanding who we are and what our nature is, our veil. You can't expect us, for example, to accept, you can't base unity upon ignorance. You understand? So when they say everybody's the same under the skin, well, we're not the same. So of different blood types, you understand? Our DNA works differently. We're a different type of species from people around the world. So if we all know this, then we can come together and under a common cause and the betterment of everybody. But if it's only set society is only set to one vibration, which is designed to optimize a certain group of people, then that's going to lead to injustice. Understood? And you can't build a society on that basis. So if you point these things out in a society, you point out the inequalities between the races, they've got a bunch of names for you to try and keep you suppressed, like black nationalist and black supremacist and different things of that nature. This is far from who we are, and these statements would not be made if that was in the mindset, as I say, of the master teacher's thinking. You think about it, we've been under a spell. The approach that's been used clearly to shake us and get us to see things, shake our minds to get us to see things for what they really are, requires a certain type of approach, because we're still under the rule. I say the good example is like a domestic violence victim. If you were to listen, as I say, to one of their sessions, from a woman maybe in a refuge, I'm saying women for this example, but in a refuge, it's going to sound, when they're speaking about, to try and restore, that woman's personality back to what it should be, having been under the suppression of this, minded individual, manipulated her mentally, beat the person physically, so on and so forth. Those sessions are going to sound for a long time anti-men. If you were to listen in to it, it's going to sound anti-men. Yeah, and so, but that's just part of the healing that person needs in order to restore balancement to her being. Yeah, having gone through that level of trauma. Yeah, because within all that trauma, any good that the person did, understood, that person's interpreting that good as love. You understand? Not having anything maybe outside of that or in that moment to compare it to. Understood? And it takes a long time to remove that from a people. And in our own situation, it can take at least 400 years. As I say, if we do the work now, at least 400 years to remove the impact of that when the genes shift to another generation. Now, this is the other slide that we're going to move on to get into the subject today. The science of religion. The science of it. And we read this before, but we're making emphasis again today. The degree of criticism, which I think is coming back out again as a book. Page 470. So right there, 470 pages in, talking about the science of religion. Yeah, the interference of the dead into the lives of the living. Yeah, but what are the dead? Those negative forces in nature you must oppress, suppress, repress in order to depress and subsist on living substances and living beings in order to survive. So this is a science of their religion. Yeah, the science of it, and to subsist. Yeah, offer that negativity. So not only must a negativity be generated from individuals, understood, it's what they live on, it's what they survive upon, understood, but it only comes from what? Living beings and living substances. Yeah, so they need those living entities to feed upon. And if you're ignorant to what is taking place in terms of that cultural science that these beings now live off, understood? So it requires living entities in order for it to work. It doesn't require dead entities. It requires living entities for it to work. Yeah, and what that interference is to divert that energy, understood? Yes, divert that energy to them and away from the living who is supposed to be going to. So your genes obviously reflect, the reason why you look the way you look is because of your genetics, your genes, understood? And our genes are informed by our outformational ancestors, understood? And then inform our informational present being. Yeah, so we have outformational ancestors, you understand, by way of our genes are informing our informational present being. And so that link that is there, our culture, our religion must support that journey. Understand? It's not about that umbilical cord getting plugged into any source. Understood? Your umbilical cord is linked to your mother. who was linked to their mother's mother and linked to their mother's mother, spiritually, obviously, and physically. And the interference of that is a problem in nature, because it's going to basically mean that we're not able to fulfill our potential because our energy is being siphoned off, understood, to help and feed somebody else. Now, if they did not have things to feed off of, what would happen? They'd die out. Understood? So a certain point on this planet, when it talks about that there were no death forces here, understood, because you didn't have beings who were dead. You had beings that were constantly living. You sound like the evergreen tree. The evergreen tree is evergreen. Yeah, it doesn't go through the cycles of ascension and decline in that regard. You understand? It stays the same throughout the so-called 4 seasons that we see here on the planet Earth. So very important as we step through what we're dealing with today to understand that. And obviously the 2 forces of Nupu and Zupu. So Nupu representing life, reflected in the element of water, and Zupu represented in terms of fire, in terms of that viewpoint of the world. One aligned back to the water, aligned back to the Tharu as our deity forces or ancestors, where we get the English word nature from, and the fire relates back to the Anunnaki and the Pleiadians, which is the overseers of the Caucasians. Understood? So 2 forces, and as you know, water puts out fire. You understand? So from a certain perspective, they appear to be opposing each other, understood? But when we look at it, both are needed, both have a purpose, etc. When we look at it from Panatharu's point of view, because obviously they're all part of nature. But the forces they represent, in the sand, we obviously need to align with that which is related to our familiar, as they say familiar spirits, right? And a lot of the occult stuff and teaching, but the word familiar in there is the word family. Yeah, so it's your family spirits, your family line, which you're supposed to be dealing with, and somebody who's seeking to divert you away from that is seeking to alter your vibration and use you for their own purposes. You understand? This is that spiritual ignorance that we're talking about. We showed you this before about those secret societies mimicking many elements from our culture and acting like an eclipse. Understood? So they're blocking, understood, us from receiving the necessary, let's say, originally outformation coming to us in the form of information in order to transform us. You understand? And so that is external in terms of the attack, but as you know now, because of the genetic kiss doctrine, it is a internal attack in our genes as well, because of the exchanging of fluids, and we exchange those fluids without knowledge of what actually we were almost signing up to. Do you understand? In terms of taking on all of that person's ancestry, good, bad experiences, etc., that's happened to them, and any 30 people that they've also mixed with. You understood? And not understanding that, or walking around in ignorance of that, meaning that we're thinking every thought that we think, every desire, etc., is our own when it's not. Yeah. So if you sort of think to some degree, and getting to where we are today, but if you understood, so because we're in a technological society at the moment, correct? So if you sort of, let's say for example, anybody most people I suppose on this call have got some form of smartphone, and if you've ever changed that particular device, you know there's technology now that will allow you to store that, all the messages, etc., that you had, the history of using the phone, all the apps, so on and so forth, isn't it? You take it from the old device, and then you're able to shift it onto a new device, for many reasons. It's broken, it's not working no more. Be able to, if you back up your phone on a regular basis, which you should do, you're able to then to add that to your new device whenever you choose to change it over. Now imagine you have a phone, yes, and when you basically, if you start using, anybody's experience, if you start using a new device, and let's say it's plugged in, but you haven't added the old stuff yet, what happens is that obviously you get a message, people phoning you, whatever, so you start to get a history on a new device. When you then add all the old information back from your previous device, it's going to merge them together. Now, it doesn't differentiate between the old and the new device. Obviously, you know it because you know the history of the two devices. But it's going to put all your messages under the message section, isn't it? It's going to put all your apps in the app section, so on and so forth. So to you, if this works seamlessly, everything's just going to appear as new on the one device. Now, imagine you, to understand genetic KISS doctrine properly, imagine now we've all got these mobile smart devices or whatever, but if you get within 10 centimeters of a person, unbeknown to you, your phone is going to absorb the information from the other person who you're connecting with, unbeknown to you. So you're going to basically, your phone is going to automatically absorb all of their messages, all their apps, everything that they've been using their phone, and now comes onto your phone. Now, when you pick up your phone the next time, you see you've got all the messages in the message section. So you're going to naturally assume, because you don't know what's taken place here, you wasn't aware of this interaction. Let's say the phone companies all around the world didn't tell you that this was a feature, or an unknown feature of this particular device. So you've taken all this information on board unknown. So when you go into your messages, you're going to see the person's messages and your own messages as your messages, because you only know when you press that message button, you assume every message is for you. All the apps that are there are going to be now your apps, and then the new person's app, you're just going to see, okay, these are apps now, and you start getting notifications from these apps on your device. Now, if you wasn't aware of that process of the exchange, you're going to see everything on your device as your own. You understand? You'll see everything on your device as yours. When somebody tells you differently, on it, had some understanding, you see it as yours, and you're going to act accordingly. Or you could act accordingly. Unless you had a strong understanding of self to know, well, this is my messages, or these are not my messages. Now, before somebody come along and warned you or taught you about that, you're in that state of ignorance. And this is the same thing that happens with this genetic KISS doctrine. You're exchanging fluids with the individual, and you're taking on all of the activities, apps, behaviors, of that particular person, or who they've interacted. Now that's in your being now. If you're not aware that has taken place, it can be difficult to differentiate between what's your thoughts and what is the other person's thoughts, and so that understanding, that ignorance, is another thing, obviously, that's contributed to the spell, because you're fighting forces from the inside out as well as the outside in. Not having this awareness, and the way, as I say, we talked about this a little bit earlier, because the society doesn't have a culture and information that is aware of that, these exchanges take place all the time, and it's making the problem continually worse. It's not even a sight of it getting any better, because it's not even factored into this society. You understand? If anything, as I say, people's sexual expression is becoming more undisciplined as opposed to more disciplined. Do you understand? Now, who's to say whether people would change if they did know this information? But the important thing for us is, or at least in this generation, and to inform the children, is that actions, obviously within nature, have consequences. Understood? And so you can see the importance of the who, kind of, what, where, why, how, so on and so forth. Obviously, proof, confirmation, reveal, these necessary steps of why you may design a society differently once you understand these rules in nature and how those rules work, and how we are not only a part of the environment, as you saw from the affirmation that we started with. So we are the environment as well as individuals. We are the environment. So therefore, your ancient Egyptian ancestors put certain things in place. They were given a culture by their higher ancestors to manage both environmental factors and self. The reason why this was a problem where we were going through these monotheistic teachings was because there's no context. Thou shalt not kill. Well, what's the context? Why thou shalt not kill? You understand? What's the problem with that? You understand? Because in their book, the context was never provided. It was never given. It was never explained. The Israelites went out killing people. They killed many people. In fact, their God told them to kill people. And then you had a law that said, don't do it. You had a law that said, don't lie. Well, why not lie? What's the issue with lying? Yeah? Again, those 6 knowledge questions and the reveal. The context, why? Why not sleep with another man's wife? The desire's there, isn't it? You understand? If the desire's there, why not do it? Well, in a peaceful society, if you're trying to keep unity, human beings kill each other. Yeah, because of what? The doctrine of mine that we have taken on board as animals. We kill each other out of jealousy. That's mine. That is my wife. That is my husband. That is my man. That is my woman. That's how we perceive it to be. Yeah, so our understanding, we're trying to build back a society now in terms of what is optimum. Well, the reality is that Wu-Sabat has been designed for us, isn't it? What, to not only fulfill that ascension pathway, but as we're doing that and we're living, trying to achieve those particular goals, we have to do that in a group. We have to do that together in order for survival, in order for optimum living. So there's certain principles that we obviously choose to live by, and that may be necessary at certain points to not always move off of desire and instinct, you understood, but to suppress it for the betterment of the whole. Understood? So you're contributing not only to yourself as an individual, but you have to make decisions about what is best for the whole. You understand? As it says in the 9 ball, in that regard, you understand, what is best for the individual is not always best for the race, but what is best for the race is always best for the individual. You understand? So you have a responsibility to manage environmental factors as well as yourself. 24% of your DNA is constantly changing. It's affected by the environment. You are the environment. You are it. You understand? So we can't put our head down and see all the environmental factors happening around the world and think that it doesn't pertain to us or concern. We still have to be aware of it because we are a part of it, and we as a people have let it get out of hand. We've left it in, or we allowed it, as I say, or allowed ourselves to be fooled so that it's now in the hands of people that their nature is only one of destruction. You understand? And obviously want to see this environment destroyed to be, cleansed for them to fulfill it with their own purpose. You understand? Thinking about the Anunnaki, some of these extraterrestrials, overlords, using, their so-called children to fulfill that particular purpose. You understand? So again, these are things that we have to understand, and an interesting maxim that you see there is that if you won't drink poison, then don't listen to fools. So we have to guard what we're taking in as important as what we, same way you say what? You are what you eat, correct? So that is to say that what I consume in terms of through my mouth, then it becomes part of my being, correct? That's what we're saying, yes? And if you're female or sacred feminine, then you've got the science of the 2 mouths, isn't it? So what you take in through your mouth, which is on your face, and what you take in through the vaginal orifice, overstood, becomes part of your being. You understand? Now we've got to understand that what you take in through your senses, sound and light vibrations from media sources, television, whatever the case may be, that also becomes part of your being. Yeah, so you now should understand that environment is important, because if I'm in the right environment, many people don't have a lot of discipline, but if they're in the right environment, they'll do the right thing for them. You understand? Or what's best for them as a whole, or what's best for their decision. So the challenge is, obviously, we have to create that. Yeah, we have to create that environment. Understood? To be able to live in. It's not about living as poor, righteous teachers, because they put us on, put us on the richest part of the planet in order, so they didn't intend for us to suffer, you understand, the way we are in this society. And that's a certain type of living. Understood? That's not to say that we don't have challenges on the way to overcome, but it wasn't to be our a standard experience, so to speak, and so not from a loving group of ancestors. But our genes have been poisoned, for lack of a better word, and you need to know who's who. So we've got a different set of challenges and tests and goals in front of us to see what is really our true nature. How sincere are we about this way of life that's been presented in front of us? Or do we really love the ways of the Mukasu, you understand, which we claim to be opposed to? We understand that it's not the best for us, understood? Yeah, but we like a Haagen-Dazs cookies and cream. You understand? We like a Ben and Jerry's, knowing that it's bad for us. We're going to drink a Coke now and then. Not everybody on the call, but people are going to do these things because what the person's like or what they've learned to like. Yeah, and certain choices that we make are based off of desire and instinct, as opposed to the longer term journey of our ascension pathway. Understood? Yeah, so this is why it's important, and one obviously here who was sent specifically for that purpose. You understand? Doesn't mean we're not moralizing here in that regard, but what we're talking about is doing what is necessary to fulfill one's potential. Yeah, this is what we're talking about in this regard. Now, so what we're going to do, we're just going to jump into a couple of things as it relates to the nine. Yeah, let's step into a couple of things from the nine. Just for speed, we're going to keep it in English to read through. And it's just to set us up. So basically, in fact, let me come back out so we just get a bit of an understanding. So we're going to deal with the Wiccan cults today. And then next, on part 2, we're going to cover bones and semiconductors. So we have to understand that the structure of the body is in a crystalline fashion, understood? And it enables us to receive or process outformation. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in part 2. And then freaks and creatures. Well, creatures, or the perfect creature, is the science people in South Africa. But then what are the freaks? Well, there are a lot of experimentation that's taken place, which has led to oddities, one may say, across the planet. Now, some of those oddities have been, as a result of extraterrestrial experimentation. Now, some of those things have been thought to be myth and found in various different religious books, tablets, scrolls, records of ancient times, even modern times today. What are their origins? Where did they come from? So on and so forth. Excuse me. And so, and certain symbolism, stories around how things have got confused and meshed together. So what is myth? What is legend? What's the origin? Where did it come from? That's what we're going to deal with in part 2 as part of that. But today we want to understand a bit more about some of the Wiccan cults and the Wicca religion. So what the culture, which we have now received today in a watered down form in the case of monotheistic religions. So, any questions before I move to this next section?
Yes, there is one question.
Go ahead.
Judith has asked, what she's asked is 1970 New Souls born, why? What of the old souls? Where do they fit in?
Well, we just have to discard them and put them in the bin. Yeah, they're of no use anymore. No, I'm joking. So basically, remember, it's just a case that they've been here for a long time, because oftentimes, remember, when we look at the spiritual you after the physical you dies, master secrets, as I say, people get choices in some instances, and sometimes they have done something within life that has meant that basically they have to come back for a second term because they breached one of the rules in nature. For example, I think we talked previously about one of those is abortion, for example. There are many abortions that happen. It's not about a pro-choice, or whether you're pro-choice or not pro-choice. Here, for example, if someone was raped and they got pregnant by somebody who raped them, and you terminated the child, I mean, that's a logical decision. I'm not saying it's by moral standards it might not feel right, but that's a kind of a logical decision. You understand? It's not the end of that problem for, you understand, let's say this is a woman who is raped. The issue is that the way Panatharu have designed the universal environment, there are rules that govern the growth and operation of that environment. You understand? Which is not somebody sitting there with some kind of pen or paper, decision making, looking over every life form's good and bad decisions. They're built into the environment. You understand? It's self-sustaining. Does that make sense? So we trigger certain rule. We may breach a certain rule, which then causes a number of consequences that have to then be balanced out as a result. So to deter people from killing each other, for example, there are rules built into the system, understood, as a result of that. And so at a certain point, before you're able to ascend, your being has to be balanced, you understand? So certain actions have to be satisfied, so to speak. So if you kill somebody, or in that regard, and this is why I say it's not a pro-choice issue, I'm just giving that example, it's not a pro-choice issue, because in that instance, both male and female are party to the decision, you understand? So it automatically triggers, okay, you're going to have to go back down and balance that out, unless you get an exception from the ascending master that governs, as I say, transitions outside of this particular realm. Understood? So you have to pay or balance out your being. You have to understand rejection. So that next life may be one that's full of rejection, so that you, or your soul at least, understands the impact or consequences of certain decisions that we make. So some people, because certain instances, they may choose to go back for various reasons and say, you know what, I'm not going to ascend yet. I want to try again. I want to master self. I want to master this school before I, transition to that next level of things. Because I suppose, in one sense, however you've developed yourself here, or your soul here, then you're going to start in the next level of things at that level. And the only reasonable kind of comparison I can give is the same when you go to the university here on Earth. Understood? You come out of a certain grade, that's going to lead to a certain type of, or could lead, let's say, to a certain type of life experience as a result. Somebody with a 2-2, for example, in England, those are the grades in England, but a 2-2 is probably, I think, they're one of the lowest grades. A first is the highest grade. So somebody who gets a 2-2 in the University of Life, for example, may decide, no, let me go back and do it again and try and achieve a first. As opposed to trying to manage and struggle with all the challenges a 2-2 brings. So those are the reasons why certain times why old souls may be coming back around again. They may have chosen to come back, or they may be forced to because they've breached certain rules within nature, where, as I say, some balancing has to be paid out because you've triggered something that means you can't ascend. Again, you see it here, isn't it, in life, in some of the things in society, rightly or wrongly. person has a criminal record, for example, it alters certain choices that the person's able to make. Now, some people are able to overcome those things, but it alters certain choices that the person's able to make as a result of previous action. So it's a similar thing loosely to that. And so some come back by choice, some come back because they have to. Yeah. Any other questions?
Right. Somebody, Corinne, asked if we breach rules on Earth, how and what can we do to correct it to avoid returning back? But you've answered the question.
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? This is why the Master explained about if you look in that original Right Knowledge series, I don't even think that we fully understood it until maybe even now in the Hereafter doctrine, like spiritual ignorance and racial blindness. That was the original definition, or one of the definitions that they used for the spell that we were under, understood. And so that spiritual ignorance is part of it, because there's rules that you're not aware of that you trigger. We know about religious laws, you understand, and commandments and things of that nature. We know about societal laws and things. Even then, you may breach something that in society because of ignorance. You didn't know. I didn't know that was wrong to do that until somebody obviously points it out to you. So it's a similar thing in that regard. The problem is that the societal laws, oftentimes, not all the time, but some of the societal laws, and then some of the so-called religious laws, they don't have anything to do with nature's rules. You see what I'm saying? So, and in fact, a lot of times they can be opposed to nature's rules. You see? So something that can be legal can be anti-nature. Understood? Like somebody smoking a cigarette which is going to kill you, you understand, every time you smoke one, give you cancer or whatever the case may be, is legal, but it's anti-nature. You see? So, so there are certain things that, as I say, that are built into the system to stop people from, they're preventative. For example, you cannot go out there, one of the rules, like the Code of the Races. Code of the Races says, because I saw a video of an elder. It was very wise words, like nice words or whatever. They were talking about forgiveness and how a person needs to alleviate some of the stresses, etc., that they're carrying by deploying forgiveness. Now, those could be considered to be wise words, but you have to look at it against our doctrine. What does our doctrine have to say about it? Because forgiveness doesn't mean what people think it means. Yeah, forgiveness is, I'm paraphrasing, but it's judgment delayed but not satisfied. Understood? So when a person is forgiven, it only basically delays that judgment. It doesn't satisfy it because the person didn't receive justice. You understand? Now, when we're amongst each other, the reason why they say, you understand, amongst each other is because if we're in the same genetic grouping and we share the same esoteric or spiritual parents, we're judged as one group and one body. So in essence, if I not forgive, insane, but I'm going to hold a grudge for that particular situation, if we can work out a reasonable way for me to be compensated. Now, if I've got money and you steal £100 from me, for example, I'm going to be upset that you stole £100, but maybe the consequences of that I'm not going to feel physically. You understand? But obviously it's a betrayal of trust and different things, etc. So if we work out a scenario or situation where we can repair that trust, I'm not going to forget that you stole the £100 from me, but it's not going to maybe impact. Over time, we understand our nature. Over time, I'll forget. It could be cool, so on and so forth. And actually, it's money. So do I place more emphasis on that than something else? So we may work out a plan where we can be cool again. It's not going to impact certain things. But as the person, you might want to know, well, why did it happen? Why didn't you come to me for help? There are going to be a lot of situations to calm yourself down and to balance us back to a situation. You understand? And if the person's of your race and of your kin-kind mindset, you're the same culture, whatever, then to some degree you got an obligation to try and work it out. You understood? Not to say that you're going to forget, but you got an obligation to try and work it out, not hold grudges, so on and so forth. Understood? When it's of another situation or a person of another race, then the rules don't apply in the same way. Now, if you try and do something to somebody because of their race, if you impart a negative act, for example, against somebody because they're white, or because the person is black, or because the person is, let's say, Mongolo or Mongoloid, or whatever the case may be, you violate something from the code of the races, and that says that you shouldn't enact adverse or negative acts against a person because of their race. And if you do that, the consequence doesn't just fall upon the person, it falls upon their children as well. And so these are rules, natural rules built into the system to, I suppose, promote or support behavior that is not going to mess up the environment. Understood? And so this is why you see, for example, the Mukasu or the Caucasian, for what they did to our people, because they'll say now today, when they talk about the reparations discussion, which we could have a long debate upon that. In a sense, it's not reparations that we're looking for, it's compensation for breach of human rights. It's not reparations. Reparations is relying on emotional. You understand? We should give you something because of X, but if you breach human rights laws, then there's compensation to be paid. Under a different set of rules, but that's another discussion. The point is that people will say today, won't they, that, well, I'm not my ancestors, so therefore I can't be held accountable, yes, for the crimes that they did, whatever, 300-400 years ago. But nature's rules don't say that. Nature's rules say, no, they are accountable because they did it because the person was black. They did it because the person was a Negroid or Nagaru. So therefore, the rules say that no, the judgment now falls upon the children because it's designed, because it's a violation, like rape is unnatural, it's a violation, the rules kick in, and so therefore the consequences of that are much tougher. Understood? And so that was a violation for them, acting upon their own nature, for their own self-interest. They didn't ask, they sought to trick, kidnap. Understood? Yeah, the way of their sort of early ancestors, Vikings, so on and so forth. They tried that approach, or trick people to come over to a land of milk and honey, and when it was really a land of servitude and suffering. So that still has to be, as a word would say, it has to be satisfied. Justice must be satisfied in that regard, and it's not done so. But obviously, we're seeing it now with, coronavirus and other things which are designed to wipe out certain groups of people. So why is it interesting? Because the tactic that they seek to avoid that destruction is to do what? Mix in the people who, you understand, we perpetrated these acts upon. So that causes confusion because I can't, you understand? The person who is the victim, so to speak, and the guilty party, the genes are now in the same body. You can see the problem of confusion, which can happen and arise. Now, what if the person, knowing those rules, is deliberately doing that to cause that confusion, to delay the judgment that they know is coming for them? This is the type of games that get played. And so that's why it's important for us, as we're learning now, certainly the Master Secrets and books of that nature are teaching you about what these rules are, how they play out, challenging our own morality to some degree. You understand? No, challenging our morality, how we think, how we view the world, so on and so forth, to try and get back to a mindset that is more Natharu-like, as opposed to, say, what we've been raised in this society. And nature doesn't look at things the same way, say, maybe Western society or even most societies around the world look at it, which is why our ancestors they lived in a way that was aligned with natural nature, because we understood when you fall away from that, or you're disconnected from that, this is what can happen to a people. You understand? We are people who's lost their soul. They've lost their connection to their ancestors, hence why they had to send one into the world to train us and teach us accordingly to restore back that connection. Any other questions?
Yes, we have another question. It's if a person did an abortion and was ignorant of the repercussions of doing so, what will happen to them?
Seek out a class called The Spiritual You After the Physical You Dies, or the book itself to do with that. It depends on a number of factors, so to be sensitive around that, I don't want to really go into that in a lot of detail now, but seek out that book, or we did do a previous class, I think, on our YouTube channel around that. But the book is called The Spiritual You After the Physical You Dies. It depends on how sorry the individual was. If they did it in ignorance, etc., they can get an exception by the ascending master if it was done, if they were sorry for what they'd done. But read the context of that in that particular book, and it will give you the detail. When we're speaking about genes and genetics and these types of things, because a lot of us did these things in ignorance, what I don't want you to do is go away from and think, on some YOLO attitude. You only live once. I've blew it. You understand? This is it now. Forget everything. You understand? I'm just going to go out there now and do a madness. That's not what we're talking about here. We're going to hear things in these classes. We're going to hear things. We're going to read things in our doctrine that's true. So we can't fix just in our own lifetime. But you got to remember, people who've got children. You understand? The race, so on and so forth. So they'll be fixed on a collective basis. And you have to come back again. It is what it is. In the sense, sometimes we've got to get a bit steely around these things. It's not a race for the swift. If it was, why are we given 24,000 times, for example, when the genes were stronger, up to 24,000 times to reincarnate, to reach perfection? If it was that easy, then although nature does things in abundance, but if it was that easy, then why would you have so many times? So it's not easy. You understand? Or people will say, let me go back and try again, or by choice, as I say, or for want of a better outcome. So there are some things you can't get around, but as I say, if the person was sincere, they were sincerely sorry in the moment, then you have ascending and descending masters. So the ascending master would look at or review that situation and see whether it was subject to a certain type of exemption. But if he wasn't sorry, you understand, some people are not sorry, then you coming back is going to be a learning for your being. Remember that the baby that's aborted still stays with those parents, understand? So it can come through another child that the person has, but if not, then it will stay to the person until they transition. And as I say, you if you're born back in again, you will live a life of rejection. So you understand the rejection that the baby, who was not yet a baby, felt when that decision was made. And so it doesn't just apply to the woman, it applies to the woman and the man, because both were party to the decision. Even if whoever didn't want to, the man, this is probably instance, didn't want to make the decision, etc., it doesn't make a difference. Those rules kick in that regard. But seek out that class, it will help you greatly. Okay, any other questions?
No further questions.
Okay, so okay, appreciate that. Okay, so let's work through these. See what time we got here. Okay, got time. So, my beloved children of Wu-Sabat, I'm saying Wu-Sabat to Wu-Sabat. Yep. I send for your divine love bliss. It's called Ones Left Behind. Yep. Chapter Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn. Yeah, and just for time, I'm going to keep it to English, not any disrespect. But here, my beloved children of Wu-Sabat, I send for you all divine love, bliss, grace, greetings from Riskians and the overseers. So Riskians, Riskians, obviously from Razak Risk, 19th galaxy. Sirius is the gateway to the 19th galaxy. When we talk about overseers, that is the Natharu. Understood? Yeah, so the Muzaku means providers. Riskians, Riskians is the providers. And then, I won't say below, but it is below. But below them in rank, I suppose, is the overseers, the Natharu. Now, I, Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, am with you all by way of these days and times. So designed, I suppose, for the day and time we're in to bring us what was necessary and needed for our race, and anybody else who's prepared to listen. Are you not watching the world around you? All the changes by way of the weather, the works of the providers. Judgment is upon the seed of the Adamites, the cursed lepers, deserted by way of their own aliens after 6,000 years, left behind in order to fade. So their own aliens, you see here, Mukmayu, the word aliens here. So obviously, because of the acts that they've done, particularly in the case of putting the Nagaranado, or the Negroids, under a 400-year kidnapping, their own aliens deserted them and did not want to deal with them anymore. You understand? But they had fixed, as I say, as we've expressed in previous classes, a timeline in the telomerase for their genes to expire. Understood? And that was 6,000 years. So that's what that is making reference to. It says, observe them now losing their minds, killing, warrings, and confusion. Their own men changing into women. Their own women preferring canines to male human beings, sleeping with canines. And these things that at one time we could distinguish between us, Nagar Nagu, and them as Mukasu, Caucasians, or Caucasoids, so to speak. But now you can't, it's getting difficult, isn't it? It's getting difficult. Our people are doing the same thing. You understand? At one time you could say, we do have pets, or we do keep them. We do have pets or dogs or whatever. But if you go sort of certain place in the Caribbean and even in Africa, the dog home is outside. It's not in the house. It's certainly not in the bed. So, which is very different to here in the Western Hemisphere. So certain practices we have taken on board. Now, in terms of pets or dogs or canines or whatever, remember, the Master said we don't keep pets in our house, or coronavirus is one of the issues. But remember, they watch you for them. You understand? So your pets, they are certain type of pets with a certain type of connection, which is why they're used in a lot of Wicca rituals, you understand? Because they watch you for them when you keep certain pets in the house. Understood? Which we'll maybe touch on if we get time today or a bit later in the next part. Understood? Yeah? So certain things is their nature, certain things is not, which is not our nature, and vice versa. Observe their tyrants migrating, the migrants with no place to live, no home, no country, dying along the way. No one cares. Where is the help? Where is their own God Almighty, Lord, Deity, and God? Where is the Jewish Messiah? Where is the Christian Messiah? Where is the Muslim Messiah? Where is the Muslim Mahdi? Where is their own promised salvation? It was all lies of liars. What happened to the synagogues, churches, and mosques? Why are they not protected from destruction? No one to protect them is why. So this is even more pertinent, as you can see, in this day and time, because when lockdowns happen, churches, mosques, synagogues are closed like everywhere else. Understood? So where was the help? Or where are these messiahs and saviors that are supposed to be coming to save the world? I think we've seen it's supposed to be year 2000. 2000 has come and gone. We're now 21 years or 20 years down the line from that. When is this, by whose clock or what date is this being supposed to be coming back? By their teachings. And so, it's like what happens if you get tricked at the point of death, for example. You die not knowing you can be subject to forces that could take advantage of you because you don't know any better. Understood? And it's the same like in this day and time. The lies of liars. We've invested so much emotional energy into these stories, understood, myths and legends. We feel that, we can't turn back from them now. When the reality of, can it all be a lie? Is it a trick? You understand? All of that stuff. We're not facing those harsh, realities. Understood? Because a person whose religion gets taken away from them may feel like the rug has been moved from under their feet. You understand? Or there's no solution. What am I do? They had the fear imparted upon them about life after death, going to hell if you don't do the right thing, so on and so forth. But the reality is, it's all lies, myth, and legend, being proven so, more so even in this day and time, every day, that's not where that solution lies, especially not for us. Cold reality, does it mean there's no salvation? No. But the starting point that we have to recognize is that the helping hand that we're looking for is on the end of our own arm. Now, another chapter out the 9. This is from the 9, for those who are seeking the reference, a book called the 9. And it says, I, the Master Yaanuwn, had inscribed many books through Malachi Z, Dr.York, or Cran. I inscribed by way of his mind and hand. I inspired him, putting my words in his golden pen for you all. So read, and read, because we sent down it, and we sent him towards you all, one of you all. Do not reject him, do not deny it. This is your final chance. So again, the point being made here is that that the link between our ancestors and individuals sent in to do a specific mission, understood. And this is why the information, when you read the doctrine of Wu-Sabat, is tailored for our mindset. Even when it was delivered in 63, it was, if you read the 9 book, for example, I think we said it last week, same thing. It is a roadmap for how our race gets itself out of the conditions that it finds itself in. It's very specific steps about what we should do and what we should not do. Understand? Not to say that what we should not do in a lot of instances is wrong. It's just that their sacrifices, as we know them, has to be made if you want to achieve a certain type of success. Understood? And so it may mean subjugation of certain desires or whatever in order to achieve a better outcome longer down the line. Understood? And so it's important, we're taught in this society to not seek solutions of our own. Reject your own ancestors. Understand? Use their stuff. Understand? Reject your own teachers. Understand? We give our teachers who are sent to us a continual hard time, saying as a collective. We tend to reject them. Understand? If you look at the ending of a lot of so-called teachers who are revered now, it didn't end well for them. Do you understand? Whether they were killed, died as paupers, understood? Character assassinated. It doesn't end well. Those who are sent to teach our people. You understand? It's not just the Mukassu that seeks to take them out. It'll be our own people as well. Especially if they don't follow one of the religions or teach one of the religions that the Mukassu is given to us in a society of multiple choices. You understand? Because people feel, well, if that thing happens to a person, they're not Christian, or that thing happens to a person, sometimes they're not Muslim. Well, it's wholly justified because the person attacked their God or attacked their understanding of that thing. So telling people the truth is a difficult road. You understand? Because, as I say, you create, even if the person's even sincere, you touch on a nerve or talk about the truth about a person, you create a frenemy. Understand? So a friend, thank you for telling me the truth, but my ego can't take it, so you create an enemy. That's what happens. Understood? So it's a continual challenge to manage oneself, understood, and one's ego and things of that nature, because it's the barrier, or the ego certainly is the barrier, as you know, to esoteric or spiritual development. Very tough, scenario situation to manage. Let's work through a few more of these before we get into this Celtic detail. So it's said here, another chapter in the 9, Mufashnus, selfishness. It says, I was trying to find pure love amongst you all for each other, any of you, however I could not. I have come to know by way of watching you all that each one of you all only think of yourselves. This is the Master Yaanuwn speaking to us as a race. It says, yours own pleasures, wants, and selfishness inherited from breeding, mating, and mixing with the Adamite race. Their selfishness, their greediness, their perversions. Now I must report what I witnessed and experienced, the lack of love and cooperation between you all. So, whether they're into Wu-Sabat, not into Wu-Sabat, everybody always asks that question, isn't it? Yeah, why can't black people unify? And etc. etc. It's one of the biggest questions, isn't it? Anybody, and they point to other races as an example of, well, how come they're able to do it, and how come these people are able to do it, and how come they're able to come together? Obviously, primarily, what you have to understand is that if you look at, for example, Chinese culture, in the same, certainly the older part of that culture, which is one of the reasons why I think the Master said to watch Crazy Rich Asians, and you see some of the challenges around that. People obviously consistently following this, or having the same ideals or common values, etc., mentally helps people to work together. And our genes have been tampered with, interfered with, which is why when you look around, or you got a room full of Nagar Nadu or black people together, you won't see them inherently with the same features. The video that we showed you last week, Cosmic Africa, for those who were able to see that, one of the things we were showing you was you could see the Sands people, isn't it? You see the Bushmen of the Kalahari, and men and females, they look very similar. So if you think about it, even the Riskians, the manifestation of the physical form of them to some degree, if you had genetic optimization of a race, everybody would look almost identical to each other, wouldn't they? So males probably look a certain way, females look a certain way because they came from two different star constellations. But we'd look at, based on the environment, we'd look all very similar. So your ability to express yourself in that regard would not necessarily be through the way we looked per se, because everybody looked the same way. And in some tribes around the world where they've not had outside interference, they look very similar. You understand? So you don't get the same kind of foolishness that we see in this society. This one's pretty, this one's not pretty, and so then the conflict that these things create. So at a certain point, we didn't have those things in our culture. So in the West, I think we fail to understand, particularly in the West, unless you maybe go back home or you wasn't born here and you come over here to the West or whatever, you do see these inherent traits that Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn is talking about. Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn is making reference to. You understand? Certainly first generation immigrants, your parents, sometimes you say out your mouth, or maybe your parents did or didn't, but they say out your mouth, oh, you children of the West. Yeah, because there's a certain way we would behave or go on, which is based on the way we was raised. We were raised a lot of the time because we were forced to go to school. So we were raised in the school system. It wasn't homeschooled. So we're the product of that, as opposed to always the product of always maybe what our parental influences were, because the state, raised you. You spend more time there than you do at home. Understood? So essentially, we've inherited those factors, but then maintained them, understood, through the lack of the ability, at one time at least, to start applying your own culture. And even now, still, with our own culture, we find ourselves in conflict, arguing with each other, so on and so forth, because we're not always looking at the bigger picture. Understood? Until a coronavirus or whatever lands on your doorstep, and then you're forced to face, your own mortality, and then realize, I should have been working with people, or there's people in need, etc. And now we should have been working a lot more closely together, or things and decisions that may have been made in the past where we could have a better environment. Those decisions have led to us not being ready to face those situations in the way that we should be today. So this is not, it is obviously an observation to think, man, this is everybody thinks they're a good person. I'm not saying they're not good people, or we're not good people. Everybody thinks they're a good person. So they never then address their failings or challenges of their faults in that sense, or they may be in the other direction, think they're a bad person, and then they never address the positive aspects of self. So we have to recognize our own nature, so the hybrid nature of what's been changed as a result of the forced breeding and mixing that's taken place in our genes, that's taken us away from the original, and start to apply the medicine, which is Wu-Sabat, start to apply the aspects of the culture as best as we can do in the situation, working our way towards, let's say, being in places or collectively living with other people of like-minded culture and mindset, for us to be able to be the optimum environment to us to raise our children within, by applying this culture. As I said, we have to understand, and we know this already, because I say, obviously, our strength is in our unity. We have to have a solution to manage environment as well as us individually. Do you understand? And there's a reason why when you're around, everybody else who's trying to do the right thing, so for some people they do the right thing. Some people they don't want to change their nature and are disruptive. You understand? Even in situations where everybody's trying to move in a certain vibration, a certain direction. So this is why we must work towards, and pointing this out allows us, say, to think about our genes and the nature of our genes, which at one time why we kept so much detailed records of our genealogy, because you're not just made up of one individual, you're a conglomeration of 30, you being, as I say, at the top of the pyramid. So Wu-Sabat is the medicine that has been designed to address or to bring that unity amongst us, the same way other races whose culture maybe has been less tampered with are able to come together and unify under the same, for lack of a better word, religion, in the sense of a similar opinion of how they interact and view the universe, even if they have different sects and so on and so forth between them. Culture, religion, practice can unify and bring people together. So that needs to be brought to, for us here in the West, to achieve and then bring that home, to enhance and correct some of the invasion issues arising out of Afro-Africa or Africa. Now, any other questions?
There's no questions at this time.
Okay, so let's crack on then with the origins. So there's important dates here that we want to look at as part of, as I say, Freaks and the Perfect Creature as well. So, Part Asal, the origin, says, we arrived upon this planet Earth 450,000 years ago, once again after many visits for millions of years from Orion and Sirius star constellations. So, very important point. There's many things many projects that have been taking place on this planet and the seeding of this planet, so on and so forth. So, this is focusing in on obviously the relevance to us here right now, and noting the point that, as I say, we know that, for example, the water of this planet came from the Orion Nebula. Obviously, through panspermia, amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, came also, excuse me, from the Orion Nebula or the stars, is by way of intelligent comets hitting the water, of bringing intelligent life here on Earth in various different ways, shapes, and forms. And then our ancestors working within that as well to develop our life form. So this is creation, as people may call it. That ION at the end is very important because it's not a click your fingers, things magically appear. It is growth, obviously, over a long and focused period of time to get to how we look today. It says, we transported our very own seeds here inside the ocean by way of the dolphin 24 million years ago, and we examined them from time to time. So the word dolphin, as you're aware, is a Latin word. It means womb. Understood? So by way of Sirius, the Sirius star constellation, the dolphin was implanted, as I say, with the cells or the designed cells of the Natharu, and then placed within the waters here. Obviously, then those dolphins defecated in the waters, which allowed those cells, obviously, to develop into, well, starting off as simple, to develop into much more complex life forms that we see here on Earth. So people talk, it's wrongly badged under the word evolution. Do you understand? Because evolution does not mean the same thing it means in Wu-Sabat. So if the opposite of evolution is revolution, if you didn't know that, so with that R added to it. Yeah, so it's a continuous cycle of things that has been taking place. So a revolution of growth, one may say, probably would be the better way to say it, which saw those life forms, as I say, continue down a certain pathway to become what we look like today. And the Holy Tablets, in fact, is very good in that sense, although we don't live by it today, but it's a very good book in terms of getting the idea or the concept in one's mind that when the Natharu, for example, are looking at a singular cell amoeba, they're seeing that as a human being. You understand? We ourselves now, sometimes through ignorance, are not looking at that single cell sperm, for example, as us. You understand? The sperm, the star of life, or the ovum as an aspect of us. Do you understand what I'm saying? In the same kind of way. We can be, I'm not saying all, but we can be very detached from the reality of who and what we are today. So very important tablets kind of, you know what I mean, really drills that point particularly home, certainly in chapter 1 of that factor. Now, it says here, just who were these original people? Original people were the African science people, the Bushmen, the black race, the first people. We return by way of cycles, by way of time. The Jubilee every 50,000 years. The equinox every 24,000 years. Remember we said earlier, an era every 12,000 years. A world every 6,000 years. A day every 1,000 years. So this is giving the time cycle from the Natharu's perspective, not our so-called 24-hour, 365 year Gregorian calendar, but rather how time pertains to us. And we went through, as I say, I think last week, we were showing you what a world means, for example. So each of these 6,000 year segments within an equinox is a world within its own, or considered to be a world within its own right. And as we say, when you get 424s, which equals 96, those forces of 9 ether and 6 ether, they clash. You understand? And obviously 9 must dominate. So mind must rule over body. You understand? The 9 ruling over the sex or the 6. So we become more mental beings in this day and time, having control or disciplinary control to manage the vessel or the temple, which is the human body. And so we're not subject to, or we should be moving away just to doing things by, or led by our desires. Understood? So, let's say these 24,000 year cycles, obviously an equinox where the solar system is making an elliptical orbit around the center of galaxies. At certain points, as I said, we're closer to the sun. At certain points, we are further away. Gold closer, silver further away. And then within that, clearly you've got the era every 12,000 years, and we understand certainly in the 26,000 year precessional cycle that there is certainly a large change or shift in energy as the axis of the planet starts to point towards the center of the galaxy versus pointing away from the center of the galaxy. We're moving obviously to pointing towards the center of the galaxy. There's a massive black hole, and that is changing, as I say, the energy that we're receiving here upon the planet in a major way. So this is some of the evidence of the transition back to a matriarchal society. And obviously at a certain point, remember that the Earth was knocked off its axis to be on a 23.5-degree axis. So it required a new calendar to then draw a star map in order for us to manage time effectively and understand how these cycles were to play out and to look for certain changes clearly that were coming in. And certain orders on the planet obviously were designed to protect certain genes and genetics here to ensure that bloodlines were pure, to enable our ancestors to come through and provide teachers, whatever, in order to convey certain information. So outformation and keeping those lines clear to be able to have outformational ancestors who obviously are going to appear in the physical to express and guide and show us what's needed for this day and time is a certain important aspect of our culture. Now, it says the original people, the Sands people, migrated outside from Africa, entering Arabia. Some of them stayed, some of them migrated outside, entering India. Some stayed there, some migrated outside, entering Australia, settling there. So obviously at one time the planet was, before the Great Destruction, one landmass. And as you see from previous classes that we've shown, so go back and look at some of those parts, or seek out books like Proverbs of Yaanuwn, Intelligent Design, for example, which have the map to show the migration of us as the Sands people from when those, as I say, cells were placed in had a base, my ancestors had a base in Antarctica before the last ice age overstood. And so those cells, whatever, we lived for many years as mermen and merwomen and mermen, let's say, and then tsunamis forced us or threw us, let's say, onto land, and we arose out of the Okavango swamp in the South African region and then migrated, as I say, to various different places. So many ways you see our culture around the world for this reason. You understand? We were here first. We are the original Native Americans for this reason, because of this migration. Some of it through moving a certain way, but then other races have come around because of extraterrestrial intervention, where they've taken our source seed or our genes and tried to bind their own genes to make other races and sub-races have arisen out of a result of that. But that original migration is of those Sands people out of Africa. It's not the out of Africa theory, which is talking about where certain people then migrate into cold climates. It causes them to change colour. It's foolishness, because we're in cold England or certain parts of America where it's winter or whatever. We may get darker when the sun goes out, but it doesn't change however much let's say this, however white a person tries to be, you understand, the weather is not going to change the colour of their skin. You understand? It has to be forcibly something that happens to stop that melanin from being produced. And if that was the case, then every animal that lives in a cold climate area would be white. That's not the case. Think of penguins, killer whales. Understand? There's many sea lions, walruses. There's many creatures that live in those cold environments that are not white. White denotes recessive genealogy. understand? That's what it denotes. You understand? So, in nature, and that's what it denotes. So the out of Africa theory that we were in certain climates or whatever, and then we change as a result. Our color change as a result of that is absolute nonsense. You want to find out how, why your color change? Put a plaster over your finger, tight, understood, and think about what happens to your skin when there's no air that can get to it. You understand? That's how a black woman or black man becomes white in one instance. Understood? How we're processing the ether or the air. Now, so we migrated, set in different places, mixing seeds. This is moving further along in the timeline. Mixing seeds with the Pleiadians, the hair became fur. Yeah, trippy with hair. Hair is curly. Fur is like the animal's flank, like beasts. Many tried to return toward Africa. Some did, but were ordered to only dwell around the outside of Africa with their 6 ether fur. So at one time, we operated quite successfully an immigration system, which was nicknamed, and people know this already from these classes, but nicknamed the rope. Understood? So that immigration system, it doesn't mean we traded as races came along much later down the line. Other races obviously didn't look like that. Were created by their own extraterrestrial ancestors. We traded with other races, but we didn't live amongst each other in that way because obviously it was a dilution of the culture, unless it was controlled in a very controlled type of way. And obviously now, looking back at our story, we've seen when we allowed people to come in, they took liberties, took advantage, and eventually overthrew us. You understand? Our kindness for weakness, and we paid the price, a heavy, heavy price for those decisions. But nonetheless, the rope, you understand, which was nicknamed the immigration system. Obviously, you add the U to it, EU, which is means the word good, which is where you get the word God from. You understand? So it was God's rope. Yeah, that was the immigration system, because where we were was considered to be heaven. You understand? We were those gods that they worshipped. So your rope really is the immigration system that kept them in their part of the world, and obviously kept us in our part of the world. Again, as you'd be familiar with, the red zone and green zones, the planet was separated at one time to allow carnivores to live in one area and herbivores primarily to live in another area, you understand? And a barrier separated them to allow both of those life forms to flourish in accordance with their own natures. Understood? So outside of Africa, that border was kept, understood, until of the black Asians, only 60,000 of them were allowed to enter. That was 50,000 years ago. They entered around places as Ethiopia, Sudan, Somalia, Egypt, and around the outside only. This command of the 9 was violated by way of the Arabs entering Zanzibar. There are the Reds and later the Whites violated the command of the 9. So this obviously is making reference to the fact of, certain mixing that took place that basically introduced changed the hair to a more, as I say, wavy, almost fur-like in some instances, which you see this kind of crossbreed, isn't it? A Nubian was created from the term Nuban, pure gened, understand, Nagaru person, but then mixed with Arabs or Indians in that regard, you get Nubian. And so we see the evidence of that by way of the hair texture in primarily in these countries. And then, as I say, because the 60,000 traveled around the coast, that is that Yaqub story there. Why is Zanzibar a problem? Well, because Zanzibar, remember, was one of the sources of the so-called Arab slave trade. I say the Mukasu gets the heat, but the Red Arabs today, obviously represented, I suppose, by the Islamic religion today, you understand, we're trading Africans, and it was a source basically of a pacification program that basically made blacks less volatile, you understand, less combative, and pacified us effectively to become or be around them, and eventually, obviously, the Mukasu of Europe under the term Moors, spelled M-O-O-R, understood? Because when you look at what took place there in places like Morocco, etc., as Moors, a person was being required to chop down trees for 3 years, understood, before they were given a fez to wear that allowed them then to study in various cities, Morocco being one of them, study under 7 cities to master these 7 areas of secret knowledge. So at one time, isn't it, or water, I should say, in knowledge, water is considered to be secret knowledge. So you have that myth, but it's got symbolism behind it, of Sinbad traveling the 7 seas, correct? Well, the 7 seas are symbolic of 7 major cities which a person would travel to and study there for 7 years, you understand, mastering things like astronomy, various other different sciences, where they would go to these cities, Timbuktu, so on and so forth, and it would pacify them, you understand? So make them more compliant blacks, if that makes sense. So this is why the Moors are considered to be the so-called good blacks. The Africans were considered to be, you understand, who were not pacified under this program, are considered to be negative, you understand, or evil in that regard, you understand. So good blacks versus evil blacks, or I say maybe people say house nigger versus the field nigger, you understand, that kind of mentality in that regard. But that was a pacification system, which why you see the Moors, I say, reflected in not only European law. It's not to say they didn't have a significant impact, certainly in the development of European and Euro-American society. But now when we look back at our story in its totality, there were blacks that helped to put other blacks into slavery. That painful watch, was it 12 Years a Slave or whatever the case it was? I think I was watching that movie, a painful movie to watch. But you see, because that one black man had his legality, isn't it, and then the others didn't, you understand? So under the law, he was considered to be a free man. Well, the Moors, because of the Treaty of Peace and Friendship that they signed with Sidi Muhammad, the exact date is gone from me for the moment, but it was in the 18th century. And so basically allowed the Moors, certainly in America, to be considered to be legal or free men, as they would have it. They were not considered slaves. Now, the chopping down of the cherry tree with George Washington ties into that same story, that pacification project, because he was initiated into their mystery schools by certain Moors. So some may look at it as a certain thing of, okay, yes, because that's how we're recorded as blacks, I suppose, within European society and the legislation. That's why it's useful to know from that perspective. But if you look at it in the totality of our people, well, it's blacks selling out their own, you understand, selling out their own people to be subject to slavery, which still even today takes place. The Arabs get almost as, I don't say clean slate, but they don't get as much heat from the Mukasu over slavery and its impact there. So you got to understand that these religions as well foster or justify that type of behavior. You understand? So when the master teacher is talking about the psychology of them making us subservient, is because it's built into the religion. Do you understand? It's built in to take advantage. Obviously, it's built in for those forces sitting behind us to subsist off of the living, understood? Yeah, to keep the forces of death, you understand, powerful. You It's built in, and sets you up for that. And so at the end of the day, their gods help them to help put blacks in slavery. That's the straight up line of it. They help them to put that. They help them to achieve that. Yeah, because that's what their extraterrestrial overlords, that's what they did, but on a larger scale, dominating, galaxies, subduing other races to be under their wing, taking them over, different things of that nature. And so that's their origin. They're doing what their gods taught them to do, but they're here with their own mind, own thing. You understand? And they've just taken it to another level, so their gods abandoned them. So the Moorish story is not one that's particularly positive. We take the word Moor, it comes from an Egyptian word which the world doesn't know about until the master introduced it, Mara, and it means beloved, or loved, or loved ones. And they were beloved because to enter into the real mystery schools, the ancient Egyptian order, the real university, not the one that gives you 1 degree, but the one that gives you, puts you on the pathway to get 720 degrees, 360 esoteric and 360 mastery of the physical. The tests to get into that particular order were significant, and so when somebody made it, to be a part of that order, they were highly respected within society. So they were loved because they passed the bitter test to make it into the ancient Egyptian order. So here in this instance, so Zanzibar is one of the sources of the Arab slave trade. Hence, you see they violated this commandment to keep that area free of genetic interceptions. So it says, bring in the blacks from Africa, the 13th tribe, children of Horus, called Falcon, son of Osiris and Isis. So this is who we are today. You understand? You think about the HAR1 gene, human accelerated region, HAR tying into Horus, which links us, in fact, to, or one of its purposes, links us back to Razak or Riz, because each of the planets themselves has its own correlating or corresponding planet that it's linked with. So what would be considered to be Bata Nun or Earth is linked in a certain etherically to Razak or Risk, and HAR1 allows us to have that link also. And it's what has separated us, or why we have evolved. Some that have grown faster than the animal kingdom, because the HAR1 gene is extended on human beings and was originally exclusive to the black race, but obviously due to mixing, other races now have it also. So it says now, Sabians and Wapians, read the holy tablets, the scientist tablet 4. Again, the black, Asian, Asiatic, black man are mixed seeds. The Indians, the brown race, the Aborigines, the brown race, the Arabs, the brown race, and red races, not the original black man who has nappy hair, not fur. Many of us are now mixed by way of rape, and mixing has affected our own race, our minds and bodies and health. All races has their origin from our seed, the first world people. Facts upon facts upon facts. Understand? And if the world accepted that, maybe Salalism or racism as a cancer, as I say, to the human experience here on Earth would dissipate. You understand? If everybody respected, that fact. They disrespect first world people and first world peoples. You understand? They like to use them to make documentaries to inform the hidden ways of their workings, understood, but not give them the respect that they deserve, and preserve them in the way in which they should be in the right way. So it's oftentimes an exploitation, and we need to do better in that regard. Understood? As they say in their book, honor thy mother and father, so their days will be long and prosperous, but they don't live that. Any questions?
There are no questions.
Okay, so let's see where we got to. Another chapter from the 9, important one, which is helping us with Freaks and the Perfect Creature. So it says, Sabians, you must know the truth of this day and time. The news of the world are all lies. The reason for the wars inside these places, Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, Iraq, Persia, Iran, is the destruction of the truth of his story, history. He is trying to cover the truth about his origin 6,000 years ago by way of aliens. So they have all these wars from the year 2000 to destroy all the stone tablets found at these places and monuments and scrolls that expose the truth. They are the children of the Anakim as tyrants, evil and wicked by nature. You cannot trust them, what they say or print or broadcast. It is all lies. Can the children of Adam fool you all? Not nowadays. You have Wu-Sabat, the truth, the way. Well, it seems to come fool some of us if we don't apply it properly. So if we're applying Wu-Sabat, the truth, then you can't be fooled. If we're applying it. If we revert back to our old ways of doing things, then we can be fooled. Now, because of the nature, as I say, the nature of who you're dealing with. You understand? And some choose, this is the problem, some choose to live by that nature. I mean, some of the younger ones today, because of exposure to certain truths, choose not to live by way of seeking to suppress others to further their own race, or suppress a race to further their own race. You understand? And so maybe the challenge is that younger generation rebelling against some of that older systematic racism mindset leads to transformational change. But nature is forcing that regardless, understood? And so this is why statements like no one wins a race in racism prevail. But you also have to understand the origin of where certain people came from and the nature of individuals and act accordingly. You understand? At least be aware of it, that there are inherent dangers with certain things because not everybody on the planet has the same mindset. Understood? There's different cultures, different natures, and some feel absolutely no way to live off the back of blacks as long as it services their own families because you don't look like them. You understand? And so these things we have to be aware of. Otherwise, as I say, we're going to be losing it in the so-called race of the races. Now, Wicca and monotheism. You understand? Basically, arguably one and the same thing. You understand? And the issue is that for most of us who grew up, who maybe still within that, is they don't want to accept certain realities. They have confined a lot of people in the Western Hemisphere, and obviously through situations where the person had no choice, they have spread the virus of these monotheistic religions over to places like Africa, where, you know, at the end of the day, if you had a plague or a famine, or major flood, and somebody came with the solution of food or fresh water, etc., in one hand and the Bible in the other hand, you know, it was disingenuous, isn't it? You know, the Red Cross and other groups such as that, which some of them now being exposed for even more than just giving the Bible now. Yeah, going out there, exploiting people who were extremely vulnerable situations. Maybe today that would be seen as morally wrong, understood, but you know, we have seen through the invasion in Africa, you know, churches, Christian organizations, so we have massive headquarters in those areas. And the problem is that we don't realize, because we don't know who we are, we don't realize the impact of bad information. You understand? And information that suppresses a person's esoteric potential. So, one time the master was asked a question many years in the old school. Somebody was asking about, drug dealers selling drugs into the community. And his response, paraphrased slightly, but it was, what about the pastors and the preachers? You understand? Who's preaching this wrong information to the people of that time. So because we don't understand, again, through ignorance, we don't understand what bad information, how it suppresses a person's abilities, in a sense. Almost our spiritual powers, not everybody, but our spiritual powers as a collective understood are very low. We are weak, spiritually, and part of that is because we're not aligned properly with our own ancestral forces, where our real power is. You understand? And that's part of, somebody else's divine or extraterrestrial plan for us. You understand? Which obviously the master has progressively broken and continues to break with each release. Obviously, the effectiveness of that is diminished, him being in prison, and once he's out, which we need to fight towards, then the pathway of where we need to unify, etc., we made obviously a lot clearer. We need to, and this is part of the fight that we face as a people, whether some know that and acknowledge it or not. So let's look at what it's saying in verse 2, freaks and the perfect creature. It says, much has been kept from you over the past 24,000 Shamutat years of Za'amus Milkanat by the Pa'mujwad'u, evil ones, and their Milganat teachings or doctrines. Yeah. Lawi Tanan, Leviathan of the Wiccan cults. So Lawi Tanan, it does mean Leviathan, but it also means, I suppose, join on to the Draconians. Because I think if we go back to, when you saw the word dolphin there, you might not notice, but in the word dolphin, that was there in Sabaic, the root word there was Tanan. You understand? For the word dolphin, obviously dealing with sea creatures, something we're going to cover in part 2 in a bit more detail as well around that, some of the truths around that. But here we see Lawi Tanan together. It means join onto Draconians of the Wiccan cults. So we want to explore what these cults are and how, I suppose, they relate to the watered down version of how we see things controlling the world today. So from Druidic cults, which became many religious sects of Mesopotamia to Jerusalem to Arabia, to the Romans and the Greeks spread to power world over. 5. Yet their misfa'at books called the Torah and or the Gospels and or the Quran keep much hidden from all, as we showed you an example earlier in relation to Genesis chapter 7 verse 1 and Genesis chapter 15. Genesis chapter 7 verse 1 to 4 and Genesis 15 verse 1. Yeah, this is done by what? Mistranslations. 7. This is also done by interchanging the kasadat meanings of madatat words. Understood? So this is why it's called a spell, isn't it? Because a spell is twofold. Spell A, B, C, D, you understand, etc. in terms of letters of the language, spellings, and then, as I say, you see the spell cast by witches and wizards. So it's designed to trick and fool the mind. Understood? And as I say, the Bible is accepted truth because it's been around a long time, not because it's a factual book. Understood? Same with the Torah and the Quran, as I say, is a copy of both of them, and it's more a book of, I don't know, to some degree, a book of ego, because we're changing the name because we want the world to see that we're different from where our origins really were. So they change all the names to fit the language of their vibration. Understood? And yeah, is there truths in there or hidden mysteries and so on and so forth? Yes, because it's copied from books and tablets that had real science and real information connected to them. Do you understand? In that regard. But is it good information for us in this day and time? No, not nowadays. So the wheel here, there's this pagan wheel of the year. So as you can see, in here the Celtics have basically various different, or 8 I should say, ceremonies, you understand, or rituals that take place throughout the year. Understood? Referred to, interesting enough, referred to as Sabbats. Yeah, which is the same. Remember, it's the same word. Sabat, which ties into the Sirius star constellation. You understand, phonetically. So you see that situation there where the eclipse. You understand? Yeah, some of these. The evil ones, you understand, these secret societies, some of them are the eclipse of the Sun of Righteousness, you understand? Yeah, as Atum-Re, and Amun-Re, you understand? They're eclipsing, they're putting themselves in the way of. An eclipse can appear, isn't it, as to be the same size as the Sun, even though the Moon is causing, obviously at a certain point, you understand, is between the Sun and the Moon from a certain perspective, and that passing by blocks out the Sun just for a moment, but blocks out that light energy or solar energy from hitting the planet, and so it shields it or covers it. The illusion is that it's the same size, when obviously the Moon would fit into the Sun, you understand, many millions of times in terms of size. Yeah, so some of these you may be familiar with, like Samhain, Lord of the Dead, which the eve of Samhain is on the 31st of October, not, I think it starts on the 1st of October, but the eve of it that's why it's called All Hallows Eve or Halloween. Yeah, Samhain meaning, I say, the Lord of the Dead. Now, I've shown you this list before, but we'll study it in a bit more detail as it relates to this particular book. So you can see here that obviously ourselves, with animism in terms of the religion as it's considered to be today, or us as animists, ontologists as well in Wu-Sabat, and its origin being, as you can see there, from 2 star constellations, which the master builders of our race continually ensured that our buildings showed a connection and alignment to our place of our origin, in a sense, at least from an extraterrestrial point of view, to become terrestrial now. So we always kept that link of where we originally came from. It's known as a Project 24, 12 etheric entities from Orion, male entities, and 12 etheric entities from Sirius or Sirius of female persuasion that came together, as I say, to come here to start producing humanoid life that we see today. Now, 24 equinoxes passed, which is over 500,000 years ago. You see, next down the line, or way down the line, Hinduism, understood, given a date of origin. So again, all these fairly recent, and certainly in the last 24,000 year cycle, is the origin of all of these opinions, in the form of religions, come back around and embedded themselves, at least in their modern format, as you would have it. Now, we're particularly interested in Zoroastrianism because it is the precursor to Wiccanism or Druidism. You understand? So here, and interesting enough, you see the origin of Druidism is not in Europe, but rather in Jerusalem. You understand? Obviously, it's more known or more famous or associated with the island of obviously Britain, France. You understand? And these areas for Druidism, but its origin is here in, well, say here, it is in Jerusalem. You understand? Considered to be a holy site for some, but not a holy site for all. Now, let's look here. So we introduced this to you before to show you about some of the origins of Zoroastrianism. So Zoroastrianism, I suppose, to some degree, is where we started to. This is one of the. So the first aspect of the spell was a spell of Imam. Understood? A spell of Imam, which is a spell of amnesia. Yeah. The second aspect of the spell was a spell of Kingu. And this is where we started basically to, having forgot who we are now, we're starting to look for deities outside of self, understood? And the wrong application, I suppose, of a worship of nature as opposed to when we had knowledge, it was a connection with nature, not that we were worshipping nature. We are the suns, we are, you understand, the universe, etc. As opposed to now disassociating ourselves from that and then worshipping that in that regard, in the form of pantheism. Yes? So some interesting characters here out of the Sumerian doctrine he mentioned. So Zoroaster, understand? So Zoroaster worshipped a sun god by the name of Ahura Mazda. Yes? And so the Dagar, which is the fish deity, we've got a whole section of that in the next part, so I won't cover that in too much detail for now on the so-called freaks side of things. But Ahura Mazda is a sun deity. Now we see uncovered that he was an Anunnaki or part of the group, and he taught Tammuz. Tammuz, as we know, is the being, at least they mention, or extraterrestrial, of Genesis chapter 4, verse 26, when men began to pray, or prayer was introduced at that point. Now, he's also mentioned in Ezekiel 8, chapter 8, I think verse 14, if memory serves me correctly, as Tammuz. His name means harvest. So tying back into the food for the gods is the equivalent to the Jesus character in the Christian degree. So his name means harvest, tying back into this food of the gods doctrine. They were to worship one as opposed to the group, who would then start to control them and give them religion to keep them in control. Now, that religion really was the worship of introduction of fire worship, because the being who they're really talking about in terms of Jesus is a person in Sumerian doctrine, which we did see on the list earlier but didn't point him out, referred to as Nanar, who is the son of Enlil. So from that side of those two brothers warring is Nanar. Remember, Nan meaning master, Nar meaning fire. And so master of fire. So that is a person. You understand? In their doctrine, it is the same one. In their story, it's the same one who is the father of Cain. In their story in Genesis chapter 5, verse 1. And then we go to Luke in the 4th chapter, I think it's the 23rd verse. Understood? You get a genealogy of Adam to Jesus, or Jesus backwards as opposed to Adam as a character. You don't find Cain mentioned in there because Cain is not Adam's son, according to their story. You understand? So here we see the fire worship of this individual and the worship of this bright one, which should be familiar to some of these terms. You see what? Lucifer, Isaiah verse 14, verse 12, Revelations 22:16, you understand, the bright morning star. So you see it's all tying back in. Now this is known, as you see at the bottom there, as Mithraism. You understand? Mithraism. So you're now changing from some understanding that basically, you in ancient Egypt, we have understanding that we respect the sun. The sun is fully part of our culture, but the sun sits within an environment, a dark environment. The blackness, you understand, supreme balancement of space. As we said, 90%, we say it all the time, 90% of existence is blackness. Only 10%, add up all the suns, add up all the planets, add up everything that you can see, only makes up 10% of existence. The rest of it is blackness. We are in a black space. But because of ignorance, we ignore the blackness. We ignore the darkness. And they've done a job of spell casting, which has associated knowledge with the light, which back then, at least in Europe and even these places in Mesopotamia, etc., there was no electricity. We had electricity in ancient Egypt, but they didn't have electricity back then. So when they're talking about light, they mean fire. You understand? Now, obviously, knowledge in later times became associated with light, which is fire, because people read books by what? Candlelight. You understand? So knowledge became associated with fire. This is why in the language you talk about being enlightened, when anything that is something comes from the world of things, which is described as nothing. Yeah, so the subatomic world, the things versus the world of energy versus the world of matter, the world of energy we pay little attention to. You understand? So talk about the light. So in this Mithraism gave birth to the fire worship, one may say, that we see now in the Celtic religions that we see today. And I think we've shown you this before, but many times over, I think. But it's important to stick this home that you're looking at a watered down version. So remember, part of the spell was originally amnesia. Yes, then it's coming to worship outside of self, and then the latest one here is the spell or the worship of money. You understand? Now, so all these aspects of the spell, so the Caucasians themselves, they have lost the memory of who they are as well. And same through the Dark Ages and other periods where they lost knowledge of who they are and their nature, etc. So they've been brainwashed. They're to feel that they're superior, where we've been brain dirtied to feel that we are inferior. So both of us have been tricked. The average, white guy or white woman that you see down the road or whatever, is not part of the big old, plans for the society, or maybe some of these secret societies, etc. They've been tricked as well through their own media, through their own sources, etc., to hide the fact of who they are. And so this is what it was explaining it's talking about destruction of history, is to wipe out their story, because they don't like the results. They don't like the results of what was said. We were created to be food. We were created to be a disease as part of a genetic warfare between different extraterrestrials. You understand? Which is why we house so much diseases here on the planet. We was weaponized. If you're reading that in your story, you're going to think, this doesn't match up to the stuff that we've been telling the world on television, through the media all these years, bigging up ourselves, saying that we were more intelligent than every other race, etc. This doesn't fit with the television narrative. You understand? A lot of greatness comes from what they were able to show on television, which is informed standards of beauty, informed standards of intelligence. It's informed so many things in our society that affects us emotionally. And then even to the point where who is deemed to be the authority has been in our society is basically a white man, because the television's been pushing that. That's what they show, isn't it? He's always the hero. He's always the guy solving the crime in the television series with his black sidekick. You watch any program today, even the ones sometimes even made by us, it's like a situation where the black person, man or woman, is playing as a how can I say, like the backdrop to make the white person look great. And this is what happens with this psychology within TV. And when you watch programs, sometimes you're just trying to sit down, chill, whatever, watch for enjoyment. These things are being programmed into a person's subconscious mind. Now, if you've got some level of awareness of it, you'll see it more for what it is. Maybe you turn down the conscious controls a little bit just for your own personal enjoyment, but at least you're guarding what's coming in. So it's being checked a little bit because you can see it for what it is. You understand? The black man's always the ignorant guy. No, that solution will never work. You understand? And the white guy's always the reasonable one in the situation. No, come on. And then the black guy's so ignorant, so his position is so hardline. You know what I mean? That the white guy seems reasonable in suggesting the solution. They do it to white, they do it to black men, do it to black women in various programs, which you watch, or they'll make a black guy who's seemingly so handsome, you understand, by maybe those standards, and they'll put him with the white woman that none of the white men want. You understand? So all these stupid little subliminals and games that get played in the television program, but it's designed to open you up, make you susceptible, make you feel lesser. You understand? Oh, maybe these are the only solutions that I can choose. You understand? Make you feel down, depressed, like you're not worth anything, you're valueless in these regards. All these type of negative emotions, doing things then based off of what we experience as children, this negativity, doing things in this regard, it opens us up to be susceptible, to be wanted. You understand? And this is all part of the beautiful Wicca plan, as I say, for exploitation. So this is just showing you that some of these things that we're looking at here, and some of the innocent things, that they seem innocent now, and they do get us because, hey, I was raised on a council estate, I was raised in the projects, I didn't have this or that, you understand, which they told us that we must have to be happy, and therefore I must give my kids that so they don't feel the same thing that I felt, as missing out from what everybody else was thinking, because I don't want them to feel that emotion of being rejected, of not having, so on and so forth. So we're dressing up our children now as devils to walk out in Halloween. You understand? Not knowing some of all the hidden things of how this original ritual started in the first place, and what kind of what type of ancestors they are trying to connect with as part of the ritual. You understand? Yeah, on that side. So here, so you see the Pope, as I say, and Santa Claus or Satan Claus, depending on how you see it. You understand? Linked in the same type of outfit. So as children, and many of you know this on the call as well, they prep you, from a young age with what are called fairy tales, nursery rhymes, different things. So they get you to be absorbent of fairy tales. Fairy, remember we'll go into that actually. But they program you from a young age to be acceptant of these stories, things which are unproven. Understood? So it then sets you up for the bigger fairy tale when you get older, which is Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Which are bigger fairy tales today, the same fairy tales. As a child, this is what you get as a child, this is what you get when you get older. Setting you up not to fail, is setting you up for food, setting up to be used, setting up for your energy to be diverted to fuel their dead forces. So we see the alignment of the Christian holidays with the Wicca holidays, some having the same name, some happening on dates which were, as I say, considered to be holy days where they've got, as I say, the whole world sometimes emotionally invested in these areas, and certain names and titles. Obviously, if we put our emotions behind that, we're giving it energy, aren't we? And so we're the ones feeding those forces, which subliminally can be working against us. Any questions?
There is no questions at this moment.
So you can't see, it's difficult to see, but Beltane. Yeah, so a lot of these sabbats or these rituals that take place in a cyclical fashion in the Wicca calendar, here part of these origins was, say, of what you see at the top there, yeah, the Bacchanalia orgies, and you see a lot of this where you see naked men, women, and animals, sort of demons, etc., kind of fused together in their artistry, understood, where they're merging during these orgies, but they're opening themselves obviously up sexually, which basically allows them to be in-housed, opens a doorway or the connection between the spiritual world and the physical world, so to speak. So to the mindset or the imagination or imagination that you're seeing there is, as I say, it's totally anti-nature. Understood? We're seeing here. So what you might think of, well, what would cause a person to paint this type of artistry? Do you understand? Because if we look in ancient times, we're going back here looking at these paintings, but today, the modern day medium, which is no longer a painting, is your TV, isn't it? It's your is your TV, is the internet now, inside the modern computer, Netflix, Hulu, you know what I mean? Disney Plus, whatever the case may be. So this is where now that programming or the expression of these type of ideas is still there, as I say, watered down in that way. But what the output of it still leads to the same thing. As I say, you look at the TV, and we say this all the time, so we're just making certain things stick. But how many programs are about murder and killing? So much so, let's be honest, it's watered down. It's like nothing now, isn't it? A murder mystery, or you understand, this person solving whatever crime. At the end of the day, they're solving the crime, but it's about killing. Someone's got killed. Yeah, and these little murder mysteries. Whether it's an old woman solving it, whether it's the police, whether it's you know what I mean? They even got kids. They got kids versions of solving it, but at the heart of it is killing and murder. Somebody's died. You know what I mean? To keep that thought in the air, death, in some way, shape, or form. So let's be honest, the grittier it is, the more realistic it feels, the better the program, the more real the program, the more interesting it is, the more gruesome it is. You understand? This is what they've fed us on. So we don't even realize, it's become so normalized, we don't even realize that we're sick. You understand? So we can see here animals and human beings, understand, mixing together, understand, hybrids of animals. Here we see a woman here with the legs of some kind of a creature with hooves, all this. You can see demons in the background. And interesting enough, in this one, you see a black woman there trapped, or here seems to be in some kind of rope or chain. Understood? Yeah, caught up right in the middle of everything. So the question is, where's the origin of this mindset, coming from? Yeah, who fed them that to come up with that as human beings? If you understand, if you're taking it back, because I don't know, but hopefully most of you on the phone, your first thing, if you're thinking about thoughts, someone tells you to draw something, it's not going to be potentially to draw this. Yeah. So what is fueling that mindset to want to see that? So again, these orgies taking place, so you see at the bottom there, Dionysus, Greek god of wine and intoxication, which again you see in our society today, you know, in England or UK happens to be Friday and Saturday night or whatever. We see the watered down versions of this, don't we, in the nightclubs and the city centres, you know what I mean, where it allows, human beings to be housed by these spiritual forces that they're flexing together. The worlds between them are basically opened up, for them to interact, mix, etc. with each other. You understand? So we see certain pictures here. You look more closely, you can see, the animals, men with horns or demons, etc. Flexing and mixing with human beings. This is their artistry, but nobody's asking, well, what's the thinking and what was the thoughts and the spirituality behind it. Interesting enough, you see here a deity riding a cheetah, interesting enough, which ties into Baal, or even Enlil by way of Bes, because that's his equivalent character there, even though Bes is the protector of women in childhood in ancient Egypt. But the cheetah, or cheetah skin, or wearing cheetah skin, is obviously tied in because Bes is Enlil's equivalent in ancient Egypt. So you can see here Dionysus, or depictions of him at least, in their artistry. So different mindset, different cultural influences as a result. The festival of Saturnalia, which to some is the sixth planet from in the solar system. If you go in, excuse me, from the sun outwards, and ties into the word Saturday. So the word Saturday, as you know, is really Saturn Day. Yeah. So and then Sunday is Sunday, and then Monday Moon Day. So these rituals, etc., are based around things in nature, but are designed, as I say, to link them into, their six ether or adverse forces connected with death and sex as a process, but sex is part of that ritual because it opens up a person spiritually, if that makes sense. But these are the rituals that sit behind many of the so-called Christian holidays that we celebrate, arguably innocently, within the society today. So they still worship these deities and still have these rituals and practices in plain sight. Obviously, if you're not aware of it, you are not. So it's one of those things. Let me just move that. In fact, it's up there already. But so one of these. So Beltane, if we look at it on the previous thing, we see here Beltane. So it came in now, so the 1st of May. So this is one of the those rituals within the calendar that you see here. So the same thing, just shown in slightly different format. You see with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, an 8-pointed star. You understand? Interesting to note that symbol in terms of the way it's seen, understood. So to them, remember, star is a form of fire. You understand? To us, the sun is the sun. You understand? Give a source of life, so on and so forth. But to them, that sun, remember, is fire. And so here we see that this Beltane ties back into Enlil insofar as Baal Tanan, you understand, or Beltane, as they refer to it as, is Baal Tanan. And again, it's dealing with the seasonal changes around the planet. In a future class, we're going to go into, when we get to the Thule Papyrus, we're going to do a class called Thule Papyrus. We're going to go through time, explaining time and some of these calendars, because it's very important one of the light bulb moments, or there, light bulb moment, but one of the darkening moments that you may seek to capture is how this mythology came to the fore is because of poor understanding of cosmology to some degree, and some of the symbolism that's used to explain cosmology and astronomy, understood. So, and this is quite important. So, as you can see here, these rituals are based around the winter and summer solstices, understood, and so they represent forces of life, so to speak, and death. But in their regard, it's designed for them to connect with the dead, in a more direct and meaningful way. Let's say for the positive ones that they wish to connect with, for them to connect and house, as opposed to the ones that were considered to be more dangerous, more volatile, and that may take advantage or for their own pleasure, murder, kill, or cause them to do the same things to others. So here you see, the winter and summer solstices expressed through these rituals. It says they're also called the Wu-Sabat, Balthan or Tain is Baltanan, a procession that includes the merging of winter and summer, symbolic of the death of winter and the resurrection of the dead earth. That basically nobody dies. That all can be resurrected through these rituals, through Janus, sex, and thus the rebirth of summer. Participants also jump the Baal fire in honor of god Baal or Baal for purification or good luck with fertility. So these ancient rituals, are part and party of what it is. And this is one showing you that only just took place recently, I suppose in 2015 in Scotland. So in the UK, just down the road, where these rituals are celebrated every year to keep these forces alive. As I say, this Wu-Sabat, this ritual, as I say, is quite easily you see there. 3-day ritual, open up the spiritual and physical worlds so that the spirits that they want to come across, understood, can find a place here in the physical world to in-house. The only way to do that is to in-house or possess human beings physically, isn't it? You understand? But obviously, part of it and part of their rituals around protection were to stop the spiritual entities that they did not want to come through, or that they could not stop from coming through, by way of them opening these gateways or doorways. Go and look up the word God again in etymology. You understand? It means to invoke, to become possessed. So this is part of their thing, is it, to bring these forces of the dead, adverse forces, who were not able to transition out to higher ascends, but these lower aspects of these lower spiritual entities or forces, and try to seek to bring them back to life, or have life at least in the physical, to burn out or fulfill or to amplify their desires. And again, it's a ritual taking place in the UK. You see fire as a central part of that. So still taking place today. Haven't gone anywhere, haven't died. You understand? Innocently taking place, but because it's not on the news, because it's not on social media, don't think that's just not happening. These things are still taking place today legally. But you want to do something as black people, all of a sudden there's 20,000 problems with us coming together to practice our rituals. You understand? We're a cult, we're this, we're such and such and such and such. Whereas they're able to, to reenact, as I say, many of the things from Druidic teachings, Wiccan culture, that we see here today, as I say, innocently done, laughing and saying. But the origins of these rituals are much darker than one may assume. So as we touched on earlier with Mithraism, the origins of these rituals are Jerusalem and out of Arabia. You understand? Again, the hallmarks of the monotheistic teachings today. That all you're getting is a watered down version of this today, which the masses obviously has accepted, but it all ties back to the same origin of Wiccan or Wicca teachings. You see here, Deuteronomy 4:24, for the Lord thy God is what? A consuming fire, even a jealous God. Yeah? God is fire, according to this. I hope we're seeing the connection here. And we're not in our feelings about it. You understand? Yeah, how the game's been played. Yeah, this is what they talk about: evil, fair seeming. That's what they say in their book, right? Evil, fair seeming. Yeah, it's going to be made to. This is what the masses are going to be into. It's not. This is on the fringes or the extremes. It's going to be what the masses are into. Yeah, who taught the world about the devil? Who they call the devil? It's religion who taught. It's religion who taught about the devil. They spread the devil's doctrine. Monotheistic religion. They taught the world about the devil. They're the one rehearsing his name so much. You know, if you never encountered the Torah, the Bible, or the Quran, you will know nothing about no devil. In that regard. So, Druids. So here, the Druidic teachings we saw on our religious kind of evolution map. The original Druids is showing you there, as I say, where it comes out of Jerusalem and Arabia in terms of the original Wiccan teachings. It's more famously known or connected with the British Isles and France. And so Giod, as you see there at the top, was the original name for these Druids. And they had, I suppose, religious responsibilities, but also had political influence, and they could fight as well. So they would fight in conflicts, and certainly as the Romans invaded Britain or the British Isles, they were against the Druids because they couldn't control them. You understand? So they were continually in conflict, or the Druids were opposed to them, and vice versa. On MTV, they've got it's an old series. I think it's called the Shannara Chronicles. Understood? And one of the characters in there, his name's Alanon. If you watch that, you'll see basically this is minus the special effects or whatever, but the character is more akin to these original Druids, so these Giods, or Giod, or Giod, Giod. The word itself means knowing the oak tree, and you see in certain rituals, yes, we have the mistletoe, you understand, kissing at Christmas under the mistletoe, which obviously is the fruit of, or one of the fruits of, an oak tree. And so mistletoe is considered, as I say, sacred by Druids for this reason. So you can see there, quite clear on the screen, the sacred colours of the order: blue, green, and white. And to become a Druid, you need to go through several stages. Now, as I think we've mentioned in these classes before, I feel like I always say that, but I'm saying it again, is that the fact that actually when you start to analyse the Druid teachings and the structure of it, it's actually more akin to modern day Euro Freemasonry. And in 1771 is in fact where they took the structure of this kind of Celtic religion in a form of Druidism, took the structure to inform the first lodges over here in the UK. Got nothing to do with the ancient mystery schools in ancient Egypt. The world really hasn't been exposed to that side of the real and true brotherhood in ancient Egypt, because many of the secrets, they've been lost. You understand? One of the biggest libraries ever to exist, the library in Alexandria, was burned down. You understand? By the Mokassu, the Caucasians, burned down by them, let's say, to establish themselves as the authority of knowledge here on the planet. Same way we read in the Nine, where they're destroying tablets and information or whatever that holds the true origin of where they came from. So some of the practices you see, so you see here that they have 3 degrees in order to make it to, or be able to make it to Druid. So a Vate honorary degree, as you see there, they wear white robes, green sashes. You have to learn about these top topics here: medicine, astronomy, poetry, etc. The white robe represents basically the purity of the sun, or they associate with the purity, and it represents the sun. The second, some of you have heard of that term before, bard, and again, they wear a white robe with a blue sash, is what it means there, and they memorize, or are attested to memorize, 20 verses of Druidic sacred poetries, and they tend to be teachers as well at this stage of candidates that came before them. And again, anybody more familiar with the practices of your Freemasonry, one of the things is you need to have a decent memory, because there's a lot of ritualistic stuff to memorize and express. The third stage you see is Druid, and again you see there, no more sash, pure white robe, and here to now administer the religious needs of the people, and obviously should have mastered those things accordingly. We see to become an arch-druid now, you need to be what's referred to as a bard brant, and that was also ties into memorizing, let's say, a lot of poetry and writings or readings. And you need to take 6 further degrees before you can become an arch-druid or the head of a particular group or chapter in that regard. So it's interesting, some of the symbolism around here. I see 13 points, interestingly, if you count them around the top of his head attire here, which obviously symbolizes, or partly symbolizes, the sun. And you see him holding a scythe as well. Interesting enough, collecting a tool that's used to collect what? The harvest. You understand? Yeah, tool that's used to collect the harvest. And I see a lot of rituals around Stonehenge, these ancient calendars, to tie in, as I say, to the rituals around these sabbats that you see, let's say, I suppose, divined to invoke certain forces, and let's say to inform what they're doing. So the real religion, whether it's growing crops, you understand, protection, different things in their expression of liberty. Right, okay, it's 10:02, so what I'm going to do, I'll take the last few questions and then we'll finish for today. When we get back in the next instance, we'll just go into a bit more detail about witches and wizards and that type of what that means, what's its origin, where it comes from. Touch on as well to do with, we'll go into some depth in something called Parter at the Ghost. So just revisiting for some you may not be familiar with. So what is the term fairy, how it ties into the Corriganis, what is its relationship to the Part Makasu, what happens in their birth process as it ties into them spiritually as opposed to what happens to us, and how that then links into when they pass away as opposed to us passing on. In that regard, so we're going to look into that, and then also deal with a concept called mind's eye, very important. Touch upon it's the same thing really as reflection and projection, but again, understand the importance or the impact of mindset, knowledge, and how it informs a person's perception of the world. And then, as I say, we'll touch into some of the stuff that we said last time about the bones as semiconductor, and finish off looking at some of the hybrid experiments that have permeated the world today and informed, which has become myth and legend, or interpreted as myth and legend, but actually in some instances there was extraterrestrial experimentation behind it, and so they were left to roam the planets. We're going to get into that in a bit more detail in part 2 of this. Any other questions?
Yes, there's a question from O'Shea, and he's asking, or he's making a comment, isn't this barred priest the same as the temple bars, ministers of Templars in London? They seem very similar.
Yeah, as we said, in 1771, that their practices informed the first lodge over here. So you got to realize that, yeah, they allude. This is the issue. They allude to ancient Egypt very specifically to try and make it look like there's some kind of tie-in to that culture in Africa, because obviously they know that those original orders were the first. Those are the ones with the real secrets, but they never released those secrets to the world. The masses only ever received 2 of us teaching them, and they went on to create a 3rd degree. This is where these 3 basic degrees come from. They're all trapped within person, place, and things, or nouns. Now, so yes, you will see similarities in terms of the structure of it when you start studying Druidic teachings. You will see, because they basically gave birth to these orders, or they used their structures in order to formulate some of the basis of the religious practices. Now, the interesting thing about it is that, remember, they're able to unify under those doctrines. Whether they're split and they've got different factions, etc., the point is that the Caucasian is able to come together under these religious practices, which gives them power, in a sense of unity. So some people are always looking away from Masonry and these types of things, but actually when you get into it, they were able to unify. It civilized them, or their ancestors gave them religion to civilize them, because they were, obviously wild beast of a man. And so this is, I'm not saying the practices that these orders always do is civilized. I'm saying it was designed to civilize their beast-like behaviors, and has been effective, as I say, in unifying them, at least to go from a point where they were on all fours to now running the world that we see today, at least for now, although that's slowly coming to an end. So that's where you see the practices. 1771, as they say, is a key date because it informed the first Euro lodge that used the Druidic structure and practices to inform how that lodge would operate and work. Any other questions?
No further questions.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Earlier on, when you were speaking, just before you were speaking about Saturn, you said that that sex opens up a person spiritually.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that, and is it a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, in both, this is why it's important when a person, yes, because this, for obviously on the agreeable side of it, let's say on the agreeable side of it, it's why important to maintain strong and clear hygienic practices when you're engaged in a sexual act, because it is, the reason why we say it's sacred is because it might feel sacred, because without getting too crass, a lot of things that take place in the bedroom wouldn't take place outside of the bedroom, if you understand what I'm saying. I'm not talking about you understand what I'm saying, but they take place in the bedroom, you understand, or in appropriate places. So the reality of the situation is that when a person experiences an orgasm, they are opened up spiritually. Now the problem is because of male dominated sexual practices or paternal practices, a lot of women have never experienced an orgasm in their life. And the fact of the matter is it opens a person up. It activates, there's another word for it, I keep using the old Celtic word, but the Arushat, or these energy points, which the Hindus call chakras, and particularly up the purse, these nerves, out upside the person's spinal column. So the kind of joke or stereotype, isn't it, that after sex the man, you understand, he's so physically knackered because he's expressed himself, do you understand, by shooting off his load, so to speak, that he falls asleep. You understand? And the woman's sitting there, if she's had a good experience and she's opened up spiritually, actually both are supposed to experience that. So as a man, you're supposed to stay awake after your orgasm, and women, sorry to say, if you're lucky enough to experience an orgasm from your man, you understand, then you're going to be opened up and see the world a bit differently. You can receive inspiration in that regard, in that way. So it is a physical, but it's also an esoteric act, you understand, insofar as, remember, that's the way in which the children come through the individual, you understand, in order to produce life, you understand, and so the soul is present and other aspects are present there. So you need to guard against that, because there are adverse forces that are waiting there to feed off of that energy. You understand? So this is why in our Partarak, the way it teaches you to say, okay, hey, you know what I mean? Despite what you see on the television and all these type of things where you see people tearing off their clothes, etc., just come back from work tearing off their clothes and all this kind of stuff, you got to, you understand, within the bounds of desire, you got to, you know, clean yourself. Make sure you don't have sex when either one of you is sick, for example, because you're open. Then, and when you're sick, so make sure everybody's healthy, you know, bath or whatever, or make sure you're clean before you have sex. You know, things, standard things, putting towels down, for example, so that, you know, when you do have sex and all these fluids, whatever, go everywhere. You don't leave them in the bed, you know what I mean, to be there. You don't sit there when you're finished or whatever, obviously, and you've not consoled each other, but you know what I'm saying, comforted each other, or whatever the case may be. You know, part of that finishing the act is, you know, jumping in the shower or the bathroom and cleaning yourself down. You don't go back and sit in the bed with thing, because there are forces which you can't see, because you're only seeing a limited part of the electromagnetic spectrum that feed off of these energies. You understand? So this is why in these rituals, sex is used, because it opens the individual up. And if we're using it correctly, it is needed. An orgasm, as I say, allows a person to connect or receive outformation. Do you understand what I'm saying? But the way sometimes it's done, it's been associated with violence, associated with certain adverse practices, which, let's be honest, we was never taught how to make love properly. Just being straight up facts. He wasn't taught how to make love properly. Our interpretation of love is what we've seen the Caucasian do. You understand? Our parents didn't teach us, so who taught us? First instance of any kind of teachings that we ever see is when the master wrote a book on sex life of a Muslim many, many years ago. You understand? To be obviously updated in this day and time. Lotus of Life. You're learning about sex. It's the first time men have been taught and even women being taught, what is the structure of the woman's lotus of life or her vagina, because they're all different. You understand? And they need to be worked differently. You understand? Understanding that the thing of penetration is pleasure, so it's pain, not pleasure, that's a serious statement to how we are supposed to make love. You understand? Or have sex, whatever term you want to use, in this day and time. I mean, the man's idea or the idea of sex, even women, well, the harder I thrust, you know what I mean? If I bruck up the woman or whatever and she can't walk properly because we've tilted her womb a little bit, that's a success. So, but does it make sense logically? This is the person that I love or lust, exactly depending on how you look at it. This person I love or lust, and one of the characteristics of her having a good time or that I've done my job properly is when she's sore or she's bleeding or she can't walk properly. I mean, if we sit back from it, from what we've been taught, that's crazy. So, and then, you know, women have been taught, I suppose, maybe by a partner they had or previously, but harder, you know what I mean? That's what I like. I mean, is it what we like, or is that just what we've been taught? The nerve endings in a woman's vagina only go up to 3 inches. So really and truly, the actual sensitive part of it is only 3 inches deep. So mean, arguably, I'm not a woman, but size matters to some. I mean, it needs to be the right size, I suppose, in certain instances. But there are certain things when a woman is pleasured, for example, the upper part of the vaginal canal, for example, it changes, it engorges with blood, and it feels like, so what I'm looking at, like it's got small little bumps or islets or whatever, or small little bumps when it's engaged, when a woman's ready, really, she's very aroused and ready to feel an orgasm. If you're going at thrusting at however many, you understand, aggressively or whatever, you're not going to feel the sensitivity of that change as a man, you understand? And so this is why we have to learn about these things, because, as I say, in our way of doing things or what we've been taught, and what I'm saying is I'm not judging what people like and what they don't like, and saying what a person like and what takes place between two people in their bedroom, as long as both are consenting, no one's getting hurt, whatever, that's between you and your partner. Obviously nothing to do with anything else. But you got to think sometimes is, penetration doesn't always lead to orgasm. When you really put like the Lotus of Life, Gospel of Yaanuwn, Lotus Life, you fully understand why, because of the mechanics of the way the woman is structured. In a sense, unless you're using a certain type of technique, you're not going to achieve the right results. And a woman requires an orgasm to fulfill her being, and obviously men, let's be honest, they mostly do orgasm, probably 90, however many times in each instance, you understand? But again, in our, I suppose, sexual laws or whatever you want to practice or whatever, you're not supposed to leave, as a man, you're not supposed to leave a woman without her orgasm, or achieving or receiving an orgasm. It's not supposed to be. But the way the sexual process is kind of arced, it favors male pleasure as opposed to female pleasure. And Lotus of Life addresses that. So you're seeing, as we start to step more into this matriarchal rulership, that these things are being changed and addressed. You see what I'm saying? But nonetheless, it is a spiritual act or sacred act. I'm saying more spiritual, but it's a sacred act that has spiritual and physical elements. And the reason why I know it's sacred is because when it's misused, it obviously creates a lot of problems, but when it's used correctly, it can be a state of benefit. Remember, in ancient times, even now it should be used, or recently or today, the woman, remember, she took the male's energy, which was negative, and she made it positive. Yeah, and the male desire for sex as well as the female desire for sex, but because the woman was the receiving partner, it was on her to sort out, I suppose, to manage how that's used. Okay, yeah, you can get access to heaven, you understand? Because if you look at the word heaven, it comes from the English word haven. It's a docking point where ships come together. Understood? So that for a man to experience heaven, which is between the legs of a black woman in this case, but between the legs of a black woman, yes, you can have heaven, but do the garden. You understand? First. You know what I mean? Do this first, do that first, then you can get. You understand? Be successful, then you can get. So that's been kind of misinterpreted. A lot of this thing, if he's not paying the rent, he can't get this. If he's not paying the thing, now that obviously all that's been exploded out of proportion. But it does reflect some, and not that ain't nothing going on about the rent mentality. What I'm saying is that the use of the sexual power to drive males to success, and obviously conversely now to drive both parties to success, but that's how it should be used. You understand? It's a reward it's a reward for work. Yeah, same way the brain, you understand, after exercise produces dopamine and things of that nature. Yeah, it feels like a reward after work, and it's a similar thing externally and how sex should be used. Remember, the pleasure principle was placed in the sexual act so that you will want to come back again and again to produce children. You understand? If a woman had to go through, 9 months of holding a child, and then the pain, which I don't know, but I've seen it, but the pain of that, you understand, they'd never have sex again, you understand? But the pleasure principle, a small portion of it, was introduced into the sexual act to keep it coming back again. But hygiene is important. Hygiene is important because, as I say, you are a spiritual and a physical being. You are the bridge between the two, or certainly us as Nagara, which we'll touch upon in the next class. We are a bridge between outformation and information. Certainly a conduit, and you want to control who or what has access to you in that regard. You understand? So hygienic practices around the sexual act are highly important. So no things like sex when the person on their period and stuff like that. This is unnatural. I mean, it happens by accident, it does, but these are unnatural acts because they're going against hygienic practices which are put in there for a certain reason. Do you understand? So I don't know if that answers your question or if you've got any follow-ups.
Yes, it does. And there are no questions that I can see here.
I have no questions on my side either.
Okay, well, thanks for hanging on. I think we've gone a bit over, so thanks for hanging on for those who have. Appreciate that. So we're back again on a little bit of a break because we've got certain events happening in June. So look out for that on our Facebook page and in various forums. So there will be some special events happening which are going to replace class for June. So we're back on the 4th of July for part 2, but there will be some events happening. So look out. I can't speak specifically because all the details are not released yet, but there will be some classes, other different events going on to celebrate the start of our new year, which is Sabian New Year as well, in June. So look out for those. So next time, and it's a bit long, but we'll get the recordings out so people can study what we've been talking about today, ready for a bombastic part 2 to conclude this particular subject that we're looking at, freaks and the perfect creature. So if there's nothing else, send positive energy and greetings to all. Stay safe and progress and grow, and we will see you as I say in very soon, in June in Saviour's Day, or the Jed Festival. If not before then be on the 4th of July. But look out for the posting of the previous class we did last week and this one, if you want to see that again and go over some of the topics again on YouTube. Okay, everybody take care. We will see you soon. Take care.